Good evening, everyone. This is our work session, and I will call this regular work session meeting of the Burnsville City Council to order. And our work sessions are informal, and we go directly to our agenda. And so the first item on our agenda this evening is a sketch plan review for a pawn shop at Riverwood Drive. And our planner, Chris Slania, is going to be presenting along with Greg Daniel of Bravo Financial. Yes.
Is it so casual I can stay at the table?
You can
even
stay
though I have a direct conflict with this particular issue?
You can recuse yourself from discussion.
I'm kidding. I will recuse and step away from the table. I'm
okay.
employed by, as everyone knows,
Yeah.
Pawn America, who would be a competitor to Bravo Financial, so I will step away until this item is finished.
Okay, very good. And that's well done.
Thank you.
So thank you, Councilmember Keeley. Okay.
Thank you, Madam Mayor,
Yes.
Council. As
Mr.
indicated in the background, Bravo is pursuing a number of locations for a pawn franchise. They are starting with Burnsville. They are looking at the 1301 site. I'm not
Yeah.
sure if you have this, and
Yeah.
you must have it in front of you.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's in the front view.
This would be the first store. We are looking at, or I should say, Bravo is looking at the State Farm building, currently
Yes.
vacant, has been for a number of years. As you know, it's adjacent to the Islamic Institute, and they share parking and maintenance between the two. As indicated in the background, pawn shops are only allowed in the B3 district. There is also a 1-mile separation requirement between these uses. I included a map to indicate our two existing retail pawn locations are in blue, My Bridge and the other site off of Grand Avenue. Greg's location, or Bravo Financial's potential location, is in green on Riverwood Drive. They are outside of that 1-mile separation. We did hear from Pawn America earlier today. There was some discussion of a storage area or warehouse building they have in this neighborhood. That does not meet the definition of pawn shop, as it is not a place where they do business. It is storage only. Also, it's in a different zoning district, so it could not be converted to a pawn shop in the future in that location.
Can you show us where that is?
I can.
It's within the green circle?
It is within the green circle.
It's on Riverwood Drive, which is...
Yeah,
back in
it's
here.
right in there.
It's right
Okay.
That's where one of them is.
With all that said, Madam Mayor, the property is Zone B3. It was previously operated as an office building. There's been a number of amendments that allowed the Islamic Institute to operate in the adjacent building. Because of the retail nature of the pawn shop and the designation of that, a PUD amendment would be required to allow Bravo Financial in that space. And again, the council has no obligation under the PUD to allow that, but from a staff standpoint and from a zoning standpoint, we see a number of benefits to this location, which is why we asked Greg to attend this evening. There are no residential units in the neighborhood. It is very compatible with the shared parking agreement that would have to be acted upon, or I should say that they would have to work with the Islamic Institution. The layout that Bravo Financial is looking at would be a very low, have a very low parking demand and a very low traffic generator, which would be very compatible with the Islamic Institute. There are other areas in town. Again, anything Zone B3, the use would be permitted. As you can see on the map, there are any number of locations that are adjacent to residential that may be on a busier shopping center that may have parking implications and so forth. Again, what we're looking at is a vacant building that has been vacant for a while. Bravo Financial would purchase it and work with the tenant or the neighboring building on the parking. We're not seeking any action this evening, just a discussion by the council for direction to staff and Mr. Daniels. And Greg is here. He's got some information. Should you like to hear from him?
Okay. I think if we get to that point that we need any information, we understand what pawn shops are.
Yeah.
And Councilmember Mary Sherry.
Just a couple of questions. If it was in the background, I missed it. And that is, do you intend to use the entire space, that whole building?
At the initial kind of inception of it, I don't anticipate needing that much space.
Uh-huh.
I've kind of planned for initially using 10,000 square feet and having 3,600 of that be retail. But Chris did provide me with the parking requirements, and the largest I could ever see it being there would be a 5,000 square foot retail space if I took the whole thing. I mean, I would hope that it would be that successful, but we'd have to wait and see. And it still easily meets, actually the parking requirements would go down because of how you designate the,
Sure.
call it the vacant space. Basically, some of it would become retail and the rest would be warehouse.
Okay. So, and then another question related, does the same owner of that building own the Islamic Institute as well?
Speak to that unless you want to.
It was actually both of them. The buildings are part of a condo association, so it's one PID.
Yeah.
And it was, I think the buildings were both vacant. It was taken back by the bank, and the bank sold the former Walgreens to the Islamic Institute. So that building is occupied by them. They use that for their religious services or whatever they have there. And the other building, still owned by the bank, vacant.
Oh.
Yeah.
And there's an association.
Oh, it's
it's
interesting.
governed by an association with rules with respect to all these things.
So condo rules then.
Correct.
And
Correct. And
Okay.
Yeah, Mary, I don't know if you were on the Planning Commission at the time when that was done, because it was in the early 2003,
I want to say. I had left by that time.
Yeah, because I remember it was condoed.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, but it was a PUD,
Okay.
and
Yeah,
so
no, and I was just
yeah.
curious. I mean,
Yeah.
it really doesn't, I have no objection to the plan.
yeah. And for me also, with regard to, the only thing that I had was, but it's not a question to you, but to our staff, because we have had issues with parking with the Islamic Institute. And where are we with regard to our discussions with them, with their parking violations?
Madam Mayor, members of the council, staff has met with that ownership group a couple of times and expressed our concerns about the parking situations when they have large gatherings there. They understand the city's position, and they are working with our fire department on the fire lane issues. Other than that, they have relayed to us that they are fine if adjacent property owners tow their visitors' cars. So that's what they have said, and they are not actively trying to solve the parking problem, I guess is how I will say that. Mr. Daniels, when we met with him, he is willing to deal with the parking situation there as part of this association, and if I can share with them what you shared with us in a meeting, and he has a very similar situation in another location or has experience with that.
yes, I do. So I guess the first thing I'd say is I own another building that's next to a mosque and had some issues similar to this and was able to resolve them successfully. And with respect to this, I would just work to strictly enforce the guidelines in the association, and obviously I'd have a vested interest in doing so, and I would anticipate very quickly not having any issues with the parking in that situation either.
Okay. Jenny?
Madam Mayor, if I could add to that, it's our understanding that one of the reasons this building has been vacant so long is because of the parking problem. It's difficult to find a user for this building, knowing that there is such a parking situation there for them.
Yes, and what I'm trying to really address it, but it's not you.
Sure, I understand.
Because now that we have a user that's going into this building, I don't want to have the same issues that we had when the other, well, it was the mosque kind of place over on the Parkway.
Yes.
And they were using, parking in the hotel parking in the office parking, just like they're doing here. That became such an issue.
Yes, we have relayed to the mosque that with the Burnsville Bowl being purchased and converted to another use, they are well aware of that. They are aware of the parking requirements, the number of stalls that they are allotted under the PUD. They certainly are well aware of that. So it is my understanding that whatever enforcement comes their way, whether it be by the city or by the adjacent property owner, that they are willing to accept that based on our conversations that Chris and our fire marshal have had with the mosque.
Yeah. I'm trying to just make sure that we try and solve some of these issues up front. How's Aldi's doing with the parking violations over on their property?
Madam Mayor, it's my understanding that they tow.
Ah,
Other businesses tow cars, and that has solved the problem.
okay.
And the mosque leadership has told us they're fine with that.
Okay, then. Okay. Councilmember Nguyen, do
Well,
you
I
have
was
anything?
just curious with the parking, how often is it an issue? Is it a weekly, a daily,
Chris?
They do worship at the space on a weekly basis, Friday afternoons. That is
Really bad.
that can be bad. What we've heard from the building operator and what we've experienced is not necessarily the scheduled events, but the unscheduled funerals, where oftentimes it's a very short notice, and it's short notice to the mosque, and then it's even a shorter notice to the city, and oftentimes those numbers are unknown until the time of the service.
Okay.
thank you.
Councilmember Cochran? Okay. Mary?
Well, I'm just glad to hear that Mr. Daniels had experience with this.
Yeah, you know,
That you're not in for any surprises then.
no, not at all. As a matter of fact, I think having a neighbor who was paying attention would solve the problem pretty quickly. We ended up towing everything in sight, and they got the message, and the
Okay.
problem went away completely.
Good. So
I
they're
instructed
willing to work with you.
Yeah,
then.
my staff to call
Yeah.
and get them towed, and they
Yeah.
did.
Okay. Bill?
So I'm going to say this, and I thought about it. Could you have the mosque put that in writing to the city that that they're well aware of that and they're for towing? Would you ask?
I can certainly request that.
Well, actually, once Mr. Daniels, because he's going to own the building and it is an association.
No, but I'm talking about if they are in other spaces
Yeah.
around there. I'd like, I'm not questioning that they're, it just,
And
if
just
there's any upset folks, we
Yeah.
can show them that, their own, the mosque was
The
truly
leadership.
aware, leadership was aware and was for this action.
Yeah, Jenny?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Coughlin, council members, also the PUD that they operate under dictates the exact number of stalls that they get. So
That's right.
anything above and beyond that, and we've shared that with them multiple times, so we certainly can relay that to them again. We can share with them, if this goes forward and receives positive response from you, that there's potentially a tenant that's going to be coming in, and we can communicate that with them, and we can ask them to respond back as you've requested.
I just
Certainly.
want their, if one of their parishioners upset or something, that they can then be well aware that that is, the leadership was well aware, and it wasn't in a meeting, that they confirmed it in writing.
Well, when I addressed that with them, because when I went there and saw what was going on, and I shared this with staff, and then when I went in and talked with them, I said, you've outgrown your space and you need to find another space, and talked about the parking, and they told me that exactly what they told Jenny, that they would let their people know that they can't park there, but people park everywhere. Yeah. But yeah, you make a good point, and Jenny can address that. City Manager Heather.
Madam Mayor, my understanding is that the fire marshal has also been talking to them about doing marking of fire lanes. Our primary concern related to parking is public safety.
Absolutely.
We want emergency vehicles
Yes.
to be able to get in and get out safely. So for the protection of all of the people that are doing business or worshiping in that area. And so that is our number one concern. And so that's why we talk so much about safety. You all know that, but I wanted to make sure that that came out in this conversation. And so we will be doing some additional marking once, I think the snow's actually melted, so I think we can probably get started on that.
Yeah.
But we'll keep you informed of that as well.
Yeah, thank you, because that was the issue when I went there, because all of the fire lanes were they were parked there. Even the egress and ingress were also parked, that you couldn't get in. There was just a single lane, and then you didn't know whether you were coming in or going out. It was just a congestion. So, okay, at least you know, and you're fully aware.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Okay. Council, tonight, staff and Mr. Daniel need some direction. Are you all right with this? And you're okay with Pawn America's, I don't think it was an objection, it was a clarification that they were seeking in terms of where they're at and
Correct.
how we define it and how it's defined, and that's defined. Okay. You're okay with moving forward?
Yeah, as long as our city attorney doesn't tell us otherwise, I'm okay with it as to the ordinance itself.
Yeah, it's a legislative action.
Oh.
Yeah. You're okay? All righty. Continue.
Thank you.
All righty. Take care.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. The next item, Ms. Faulkner, our Community Development Director. She's in DAC. And this is the Heart of the City Design Review Committee, and this is the discussion. And this is the item that we had asked staff to research and bring back.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Let's see here. There we go. Thank you. This was a follow-up from your retreat in January, where we wanted to further explore the HOC DRC. Can you go back to the first slide? There we go. Thank you. The HOC was originally established in 2000 with its purpose of advising the council regarding design review issues in heart of the city. So it came right after the design framework manual and the ordinance was adopted. There was a committee to advise you and the planning commission on design elements in heart of the city. The policy says that there's 7 members to be on the committee. We currently have 6 members appointed, and 5 of those are eligible to renew in 2014. We did include about the last 5 years of meeting, number of times that they met. Of note here is that they did not meet in 2012 or 2013. So we haven't had any developments in heart of the city since for the last couple of years. Hence the reason for you to bring this up and for us to talk about how we can best utilize the talented group of volunteers that we have in our community in this regard. So the question that you posed to us that you want to further explore here this evening is if the HOC DRC should have an expanded role or if and cover design elements throughout the city, or perhaps play a broader role in other commissions. So we met as a staff and kind of came up with 4 options for you. And the first is to keep HOC DRC as it is. They would continue to meet as needed, which is dwindling off as heart of the city becomes fully developed. Perhaps you could form a new committee by broadening the scope of the HOC DRC, and if you want to do that and give this commission other things to do, then we should provide clear direction and a policy on what that is. That may include some staffing adjustments as well. That presents a whole array of considerations. We could eliminate HOC DRC and have a designated HOC representative on our existing commission. So for instance, on the PNRC, we could have an HOC designee, or on the EDC, we could have an HOC designee. Same thing with our other commissions. Or lastly, if we eliminated the HOC DRC, we could appoint them to other commissions as well. If you can go to the next slide, please. That is similar to what we did, option number 4 is similar to what we did when we reformatted the Economic Growth Committee back in 2008. I think there was about 12 or 14 members on that, and then the council created the Economic Development Commission as a direct advisory body to you regarding economic development. At the time, council asked which of those members still wanted to continue and participate, and those that did were put on the EDC, even though the numbers exceeded the total number of spots that were available, and then as they came up or their terms expired, then they kind of dropped off here and there, and now we've got the set number appointed to EDC. As part of this process, we did solicit input from the HOC DRC members. We included those in the packet. We heard from 4 people, and all 4 of them want to continue to contribute and do more than what they're doing now. It seemed like they want to add value to our community, but what is the right way to do that? And so with that, staff recommends option number 4, that we eliminate the HOC DRC and that we appoint them to other commissions. We certainly have several openings this year on other commissions, and some of those people may have even applied to other commissions. As you review them, you can put them here and there, so there may actually be better fits elsewhere. And I just happen to have listed those commissions. So with that, our Parks Director, Terry Schultz, is here, as am I, and Chris Lane, you can answer any questions.
Okay. Questions? Mary?
I have no questions, but I have a comment. And if you recall at the All Day, I'm the one who brought this up. My comment stems from my experience as having been a member on the HOC for a number of years. I was appointed to that because I was on the Planning Commission. When I was on the Planning Commission, we were given strict guidelines, and when I first went on the Planning Commission, there were 2 architects on that commission. We had strict guidelines that we were not to critique the design of a building. And so now I'm appointed to the HOC Design Review, where we could critique the design of a building. And I have to say, I didn't do it all by myself, but some of the buildings, and particularly the CDA building along 126th Street, that was a result of very strict critiquing by the HOC Design Review Committee. Would it have passed and gotten through the Planning Commission at the time as first submitted? Absolutely. But we felt that it didn't fit with that concept of HOC. Personally, I feel we've got a lot of talented people there. We have for years. They got more talented when I left. And but we've had architects, we've had people who have experience in designing buildings. I see a real gap in this community as far as the design of buildings goes. Do I want to micromanage this stuff? No, but I would like to see an independent group that could look at these the way the Planning Commission now cannot, according to its charter, statute. And I do feel that there would be a value that would really enhance the look of this community if we had people like this looking at some of these things in a broader way. So that's why I brought it up in the first place. And that's why, and no, I don't mean to criticize staff, because I usually like what you bring back. But all these options strike me as a little limp, because I don't think they can do what I think could be done with a group of talented people like this. So I just don't quite know how to do it, though.
Bill?
Are you then suggesting number 2, form a new committee broadening the scope
That comes
to include
closest.
citywide amenities and aesthetics?
That comes closest to what I'm thinking. It comes closest, but I know this would take staff support, and I don't know how much staff support HOC gets right now.
And see, the thing that made it easier at the HOC, there was a design framework.
Yeah.
But we do not have a design framework across the city in terms of architectural.
I know. And I don't.
And so when
there's a
we
problem here,
because we had 2 architects, we had Cheryl
Cheryl, and we had Steve.
And we had Steve
Yeah, I think it was
on the
Steve.
Planning Commission. And then when Cheryl was term limited off the plan, she went to the HOC.
And I served with her there,
And you
too.
served with Cheryl.
Both places.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so that held that, but we had a design framework.
I get
And
that.
one of the things that when I came on the council, and there was, in Burnsville, was called Burnsville Brick. All of the buildings at that time had to be brick, red brick. And then as trends changed, we started to change our materials and included some other things. But there were, buildings could not be built without, I think, the majority of the buildings being brick. So if you look at Colonial, the shopping center right on Nicollet and, is that Colonial?
That's Colonial Hills, I think it's called.
Yeah, it's all brick.
Yeah.
You look across the street, it's all brick. Those were all done in the 80s. And it was called Burnsville Brick. But there was a way that those things were really defined. But what you're talking
not-
about was
yeah.
architectural amenities, and
Well,
just
let me-
like the
let me-
parapets on the Grand Marketplace.
Let me give you an example that's a little more graphic. When I was on the Planning Commission, Burnsville Bowl was going to.
Oh,
Do I have to say any more?
I remember that.
They were going to redo the outside. Well, Planning Commission said, "You've got to be kidding with every one of these designs. Come back." Well, there was a 60-day rule or something like that, so they came back, bypassed the Planning Commission. I get that. I mean, Planning Commission is only advisory, right?
Yeah.
Went straight to the City Council with something even worse.
I know.
And you see it today if you drive down 12th Avenue. That's
Yeah.
what I have in mind.
So the thing is, Jenny,
Madam Mayor, members of the council, the Planning Commission is, in my opinion, the body who can do this. It's just how we have it set up. They are the body that is established in statute to review land use and review such issues. We historically have steered away from having the Planning Commission get into the minutia and the details as a part of being business friendly and how we process applications and to let the expectations be known right up front with the developer, and they're in our ordinance. So our criteria under which they are subject to is in the ordinance.
Well, I know it deals with like building materials and
Yes.
that type
Yeah.
of thing.
Yes. The challenge is, and the Planning Commission certainly can do this, can do what you want them to do. It just would add another layer to our review and subjectivity on the developer side.
Yeah.
They would lose assurances of what the expectation is from them from the day when they walk in the door. If Chris or I can't tell them, this is what you have to do, then they don't know what they need to do. They need to go to another committee, and it could cause delays in their, and I'm just saying why we do what we do. It could cause delays on their end. It could make things much more expensive, and things are difficult to enforce from our standpoint if they're not in the ordinance. So we tried, that's how we got to where we did, and that's probably why when you were on the Planning Commission, we really try to keep to the technical aspects of the ordinance. It keeps things flowing. It keeps them real and legit for the developer, and they have some assurance that if they meet these requirements. Now, certainly we can tweak things here or there, and we do that at the staff level a lot. You may not see that. I know we do that a lot. And we do have an architect on the Planning Commission right now. That is someone that's there. So I just throw that out there. That it is possible to do with the Planning Commission. It's just how we use that group.
and I think, Jenny, to that point, we have to make sure we have defined what those architectural standards are. That's what made the HOC successful, is because the developers knew what the playbook was. They had design elements that were required and architectural features that were required. And there were also requirements on materials and pedestrian friendly and all of those things that came along with the review process. And that was adopted. And so we knew it, as the mayor and city council, and the planning commission knew it. But the reviewing body was the HOC that addressed all of that. But to Jenny's point, the developers need to know what the expectation is for architectural design.
But we don't have any other
I know it.
district, and that's my problem.
Yeah, and that's, so if we're going to want to expand their role, we have to do that work at the front end to make that definition of what those architectural standards need to be. And then they have to be adopted. Yeah, yeah. I'm going to go to Jenny and then to Bill.
I would just like to add, we have gotten into some architectural review, particularly I think of townhomes that were submitted a few years ago. John Mahoney built them. They were off of Williams Drive and Penner Alpha. And we went through that several times to get a better design. Same thing with the townhome project behind the Dairy Queen.
Yeah.
We've gone through that a couple of times with them, and you'll see in our staff reports when it gets to you is when they won't budge, or we don't believe they're meeting the city's expectations, and we believe at a staff we know what your expectations are, and so then those kinds of things do come before you through a PUD amendment. So there is some of, I want you to know, a lot of it does happen at the staff level. It doesn't always rise to the council level, and there is some of it that has happened at the planning commission and council level in the past too.
Because I'll go to Bill, and then I'll comment on that issue, because I still did not like the design of those townhouses behind Dairy Queen.
What I hear you saying is you're still for number 4, and that your biggest concern is that if we had another layer of review, then there could be delay, because of course that's only advisory to us, and we could either reject or accept whatever the planning commission does. And so what you're saying today is you're comfortable with the system as it exists now for the rest of the city, and that you'd be for number 4 still.
Council members, Madam Mayor, that's the recommendation of compared to creating a new committee or expanding their purview. But certainly,
No, I'm not debating it. I just want to make sure that that is what,
You're saying.
based on what Council Person Sherry said, that that you thought about those things, and that
Yes.
this is your conclusion.
I understand what Mary's saying, because I think if we want a better design for our city, I'm okay with not duplicating the work of the Planning Commission, and we need to have our talented residents not be doing work that is not meaningful. We need for them to be doing meaningful and purposeful work. They're intelligent people, busy people. So if they get reappointed to other commissions, they will have meaningful work. But I agree with Mary. If we want to go to architectural standards, then we, as members of the City Council, need to then do some of that work and pull in some folks from the Planning Commission and from the EDC to do a task force that looks at what are the architectural standards that we need. Because we did this, one of the things were those parapets. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And we wanted to make sure that we had parapets that would hide all of the mechanicals that you could see from. And so there were some architectural features with parapets and then signs and all of those kinds of things. But I think that's some work that we have to do if we want to really get at architectural standards for the city.
I really think that, and I know what you're
And I agree
saying about
with you.
being business friendly. I don't want to jettison that, but I think that we're at a stage in redevelopment in this community where we want to, just as if I can make a comparison to the residential, encourage people to upgrade rather than downgrade just to fill space. I really, I want to just raise the bar a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Bill?
Well, based on what I've heard, I'd personally be for number 4, with the additional consideration of some concept of a task force to investigate further what Mary suggested, and that we,
Well, I think we do need architectural standards if we're going to have the planning commission evaluate, and then the developers need to know that that's the playbook that they're going to be held to. Those are the standards they're going to be held to.
but I don't know if we made that determination. Number 4, my understanding was your proposal is that
No. Yeah, Jenny?
As I understand it now, Madam Mayor, members of the council, we've got 2 different issues here. We've got the HOC DRC, that's one issue, and what do we do with that group of, with that commission? But then there's this other issue of architectural review.
Yeah.
I would suggest that we move forward with the disbanding of the HOC DRC and you appoint them elsewhere, but also that we come back to you then with some options for additional architectural review, whatever that, whether it's an ordinance amendment, a task force, a change in our process, we can focus on it. We were not focused on that when we put this together. We were focused on commission in general, and do they have enough to do, and what else could we do? We weren't focused on this issue. If this is the issue and the only issue, then we can focus on it and bring you back some options.
And that works. Mary?
Yeah, and actually, I think that's what, of course, I wanted to keep these talented people busy and give them something to do after they go through the misery of interviewing and selection. And, but I think that's what I was really trying to get at. So thank you for telling me
can
what I
hone
was
in on
really
the
thinking
issue.
all along.
I'm task driven, so if that's what it is, we will
No, I think
present
that,
you
I think
options
that really,
address that.
that satisfies me. Thank you.
Yeah, because that's my concern, is the architectural design, because when we did the townhouses by the fire station too, I did not think that was a step up. I thought it was a step down from what we first approved. But we didn't have design reviews for that area. We didn't have standards. So,
Yeah.
okay. Dan?
What happens when a developer comes in and wants to build upon the land within the heart of the city that's still vacant?
I think we still have a design standard, and that is already adopted, which means that staff has to make sure that that gets done.
So essentially,
And
they have
then-
to do what the HOC DRC has been doing.
But now the Planning Commission will now have also that responsibility, because now that architectural standard has to be part of their review.
Right, so now instead of planning commission, just technical merits, they will also take upon
The
design and
architecturals.
architectural based on clearly defined standards that we publish, so we're not
That's right.
shooting from the hip each time we get someone in
That's
front of
right.
us, but they know well in
That's
advance
right.
what it is.
That's
So-
right.
And that eliminates idiosyncrasies about any given council, whether today or in the future, about
Yeah.
likes and dislikes and
That's
pet
right.
peeves. That I don't want to see happen.
Yeah, and that too, I don't want to see, and that was the issue about, if we broaden it, then we need to have standards for everybody,
Agreed.
because the HOC was successful because the design standards were put in place and adopted and part of the district.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we can do that for the rest of the city. That would work.
Yeah. My
And-
guess is there are probably other communities that do this anyway, so.
Yep.
And there's good experiences and bad
And
experiences.
I know you'll let us know what they are.
We will certainly explore, now that we are honed in on a specific
Okay.
item to address, we can.
Let me just go down. Are you okay with
Yes.
sunsetting the HOC Design Review
Yes.
Committee and talking with them and having them serve on other commissions if they so wish? Dan?
Yes, and then
Okay.
inclusive
And
of that is the next step to fulfill the obligations at the heart of the city.
Yeah.
May or may not, they haven't had a lot of activity in the last 2 years, but that doesn't predict future
That's right.
activity.
Yeah.
And the Planning Commission would adopt a new charter, basically, of responsibilities that would include architectural design, but we as a city have to set out what those standards are.
Yeah, the standard,
So there's
yeah,
really not
for the
a lot
rest of the
guessing.
city, yes.
That's more nuances within a given project.
Bill?
yes.
Okay. Mary?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Heather, you had your hand.
I was just going to say that we did need to get this guidance from you now, because as you know, we're under the timeline of the commission recruitments, and the city
Yes.
clerk Ms. Collins has put that on hold for this particular committee,
Yeah.
so we
Well, now we have it, yeah.
Now we
Well, now
Now
we
we can
have
do
it, and
step
we
one,
can
and we
let
can do
the
step two later,
folks,
so.
and I saw some of the desires of some of the people who, and the HOC DRC, so we know where they would like to go. So one of the things we'll talk about, and I think perhaps we need to talk about when we're going to do those interviews, and then how we look at the DRC Design Review Committee of the HOC. Mary?
Well, I would hope that if they choose to apply, that their service on the DRC or HOC would not be counted against them.
Yes.
Right.
That it'll be a new
A new-
appointment.
Yep.
Is that?
Yeah.
That's correct. That's correct.
Yeah,
Small thing, but you never know.
yeah.
Okay,
Okay?
thank you.
All right.
Okay.
You have your direction.
We do. Thank you very much.
Very good.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay. Okay, the next item is item number 3, and this is our fire emergency medical service response time. And our chief and captain, so Chief Gilman is here to talk to us about that, and we have a different captain in front of us, and not Terry. We have
Yeah, Assistant Chief Brian Carlson's here, so.
Yeah, we had a little change at the last
Yeah.
minute there. I apologize.
Okay, and that's a good thing you have.
Redundancy is good.
Yeah, yeah.
Madam Mayor, members of the council, appreciate your time tonight. Assistant Chief Carlson and I are going to spend some time with you reviewing our fire department, fire and EMS response times. This was discussed at your all-day work session, and it was requested that more information be brought back regarding our ability to meet the ends and outcomes statement regarding the fire department response times. So I'd just like to preface it with, we're not asking for a decision today. This is more for information. Although if you would like us to make any movement on this during the next budget year, we'd ask that you'd give us guidance so that we can be prepared to make any changes. So as you know, under the safety ends and outcomes, the fire department is held to the standard of reaching 80% of the emergency calls within 6 minutes. And a few key statements there is we're only measuring emergency responses. We're not measuring the non-emergency. You know, we go on calls for carbon monoxide alarms with no symptoms or non-emergency medical calls. Those don't count towards the response time. It's only the critical calls that have red lights and sirens responding. A couple of good things is we have great partnerships with our neighboring agencies. All the fire departments and ambulance services around us, we work very well together, mutuating back and forth. And as you'll see as we go throughout the presentation, we'll discuss and come back to this end and outcome and how that relates to our ability to meet that standard. So you may ask, why do response times matter? Why do we measure them? Why do we report them to you? You know, it's one of those quantifiable data benchmarks that we can give you. And in our industry, you know, there's a number of factors that make that very important. One of them is fire can double in size every 30 seconds. Cardiac arrest survival decreases by 7 to 10% every minute that the patient's without CPR and defibrillation. And brain damage really starts to occur at 4 to 6 minutes. You know, we have a number of other sensitive responses that are time sensitive, and a few of them gas leaks, trauma victims, drowning victims. You know, there's a long list of them, but you get the point of time is important to us. And the public obviously expects us to be there quick, and it's probably the number one complaint we have is you weren't there quick enough. And, you know, it's tough for people to gauge time in an emergency also because, you know, 1 minute seems like a half hour to them when their loved one is in peril. This is kind of a busy slide, but I think it's an important one to walk through so that you understand what we're measuring and what we're not measuring. So this really defines what response time is. And on the far left of the slide is really where we work on fire prevention. Before the incident occurs, how do we prevent it from occurring? Pretty obvious. And then what is not included in that response time is basically A through F and or A through E, I'm sorry. So the incident occurs, we don't have any control over when that's detected. Sometimes that's immediately, sometimes that's not immediately. Once the incident's detected, someone calls 911. The 911 dispatcher answers, and the dispatcher answers the call and gets the correct information and forwards the information to the dispatcher. That's called call processing time. That call processing time is not included in our response time. Currently for Burnsville, the DCC average for fire and EMS calls only is 89 seconds. So if you take our response time and then add 89 seconds on average from when the incident is detected is really, or the person calls 911 is really what our response time is. Because then we get into the piece that we do measure, and that's F, G, and H. So basically that's from when the call is dispatched and our folks are notified at the fire station that there's an incident, when they respond to the incident and then arrive at the incident. So those are the three pieces that we measure and have control over. Like I said, the previous piece of the incident dispatch time is not measured. The other thing we don't measure is really the effective mitigation piece of once we arrive, you know, if it's in the third story of an office or apartment complex, it may take us another couple minutes to get to that incident. We stop the clock as soon as we show up at the front door. So just so you know that there still may be a lag time to get to that incident just based on geography. To give you a little bit of history, in the 1990s, or 1990, a 5-minute average response time was established.
And that is E, F, and G.
That was E, F, and G, yep.
Okay.
So that was all of those. So
when we're looking at these, it's measuring E, F, and G.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep. And so that was a 5-minute average response time. The average response time at that time was right around 4 minutes, and some industry standards had started to develop in the late 90s, so the expectation was taken down to 4 minutes instead of 5 minutes, and that was really what we were meeting at the time. And then in 2004, we had gotten a new records management system that allowed us to further investigate and interrogate the data. And they changed from an average response time to a 80% what they call fractile response time. And for the benefit of the public, really fractile response time gives you a percentage of the time that you're going to be there in a certain amount of time. So what it means is the average response time really is the 50% fractile. So it means that if we had a 4-minute average response time, half the time we'd be there in 4 minutes or less. So the reason we went to 80% is not only the industry standard was moving towards a fractile response time to be more accurate of what the customers were experiencing, but it is more than a coin flip at that point. It really kind of shows what your service level is at that point. In 2004, when it was changed to a 7-minute response time, that included the dispatch. So that wasn't just E, F, and G. That was the 3 steps before it.
Okay.
And we had our own dispatch center,
Yeah.
and we were right around 60-second processing time. So really, we were close to what our standard is today because we had our own dispatch center, and those were 60-second processing times. The DCC opened, and then in 2010, we changed to a 6-minute 80% of the time and excluded the call processing time and went back to the E, F, and G, that strictly notification to arrival at the curbside. So it's turnout and travel time at that point. So we've kind of been all over the place, but we went back to that 6 minutes because that's what we can control, is that 6 minutes. We don't necessarily have control over the dispatch center of the call processing times. Now we do have some influence, and we work with them to maintain effective call processing times, but it's no longer our own dispatch center. Excuse me. I wanted to give you some comparable cities. Comparables can be good, and they can also be difficult for us because of how we operate our system. But one of the closest one is South Metro Fire Department has 6 minutes or less 80% of the time, and they are currently meeting that expectation.
E, F, and G.
E, F, and G. Yep. They are not including call processing times.
Okay.
Yep. St. Paul.
I want to make sure we're all measuring the same thing.
Yep, and that's where I'll get into, some of them don't necessarily measure it that way, and there's some departments that don't know how they're measuring it. They can give me the data, but don't necessarily know if they're including the call processing times.
Okay.
So I'll allude to that as we go, because I don't want to steer you one way or the other if I don't know. St. Paul is 5 minutes or less 100% of the time. They are meeting that on fire calls, and they are slightly longer on EMS calls, and they are not including call processing time. So that's equivalent to how we're doing it. That's E, F, and G. Minnetonka goal is 80%, 6 minutes or less, just like ours. They are paid on call on a duty crew model. They are not quite meeting it yet. They do not include call processing times either, and that's why I put those three comparables first, is because they're the closest to us. But
There's a
Minnetonka,
difference. The first two are like us.
yep,
They're full-time.
Yep.
Minnetonka is not.
Minnetonka is not, but they have 5 fire stations to cover 28 square miles.
That's right.
And they're using duty crews, so they're bringing their part-time employees to come work at the fire station certain hours of the day to help cover those calls.
Can you also, because let's make sure we're measuring apples to apples, how many stations does South Metro have and how many stations in St. Paul?
Sure. South Metro has 2 stations that cover 11 square miles.
Yeah.
And St. Paul has 15 stations that cover 56 square miles.
Yeah.
So when you look square mileage per fire station, it's significantly less than what
Yeah.
we're at.
Yeah.
We have 2 fire stations covering 27 square miles. So.
And that's what I want to make sure, that we're all looking at the same factors and
Yep.
measuring the same thing.
Yep. Absolutely. The national standard in the industry is the National Fire Protection Association. Their standard is 5 minutes or less 90% of the time, but that includes a 60-second call processing time. So it's really a 4-minute response time.
Yeah.
And then the next closest, but they don't do fractile, is an average response time of 4 minutes from Richfield, and that's their actual, that's not a goal.
But again, Chief,
Yep.
on the industry standard, how close, how many fire stations per square mile are they measuring?
They don't tell you that. They just tell you this is what you should meet. They don't necessarily give you a recommendation of each fire station
Yeah.
should cover 10 square miles or 5 square miles. They don't, because it all depends on density and call volume.
Sure.
But they don't give you a recommendation on the number of fire stations. They only give you a recommendation on time.
Okay.
Richfield is also close to us with a full-time staff, and again, their average is 4 minutes.
How many stations?
2 stations and 7 square miles.
Yeah. Much smaller.
Some other cities that we got data from that may or may not be as comparable, but I wanted to show you at least some of the data out there, is Brooklyn Park. And Brooklyn Park is an average of 4 minutes 56 seconds. None of these are actuals. None of these are goals. So Brooklyn Park runs a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week duty crew program with part-time employees. Bloomington is 5 minutes and 44 seconds to their arrival of their first engine. That'll become important here in a minute. I'll discuss that. Roseville is 4 minutes 5 seconds on average. Coon Rapids, which is similar to us, they run full-time staff, and their average is 4 minutes and 59 seconds. Now you see I have 2 times here under Lakeville, Apple Valley, and Egan. They're completely paid-on-call departments with some full-time administrative staff, and they run some duty crew stuff during the day, but that first time, so Lakeville, 5 minutes is the arrival of their fire chief or one of their chief officers. 10 minutes is the arrival of the first engine. So for us, when we report response times, it's the first fire engine or the first ambulance to arrive. For them, the first time they report is the first chief officer, which is great to get kind of a size up of the incident, but you can't really do any effective mitigation until you get that fire engine there.
Larry?
Does that include EMS response as well?
Yes. Yep. But they don't necessarily go on everything. Lakeville, Apple Valley, and Egan only go on critical medicals. Alina and Healthies provide their ambulance, and their police departments respond to all of the medicals to first respond for the Alinas or the Healthies ambulance coming.
I forgot that. Thank you.
Yep. Apple Valley is 5 minutes for their first chief officer and 9 minutes for their first fire engine, and Egan is 6 minutes and 9 minutes. Again, some differences here is we have a single layered EMS and fire system. Is our police only first respond on very critical medicals, cardiac arrests, unconscious, and they have very minimal training as opposed to some of these other agencies that rely on their police department to do that first response component and then train them to a higher level. So really we've kind of eliminated that, and they support us on those critical medicals, but they don't go on every medical, whereas these other agencies that use private EMS, their police department sends multiple officers on every medical in the city. So things that really affect response times, and we'll talk about these individually, but there's 5 things that really affect response times: call volume, staffing, geography, population, and then technology and equipment. So to give you somewhat of a historical perspective, when we were talking again back in 1986, the average response time was 4.3 and 4.1 minutes, and there was no goal established at that time. When you get to 1990, it was 3.8 and 3.9, and that's when we had the 5-minute average goal. And then in 2000, we were at 4.72 and 4.93 average response time with a 4-minute average goal. Then you see in 2005 we converted to that 7-minute average, but that included call processing times, and we were at 69% and 81% compliance with that. 2010 we were at 56 and 68 with the 6 minutes, which did not include call processing. That was just the EF and G, that actual response piece. In 2013 we were at 61 and 68% of reaching emergency calls. The one thing I forgot to talk about in those comparables is all those other agencies included non-emergency calls in their average and their percentile responses. So they don't pull out emergency calls like we do. So that's one of their factors. They have non-emergent calls that are factored into their response time as well.
Yeah.
How does that affect it?
Yeah.
So if we were to add our non-emergent calls, our compliance rate would drop significantly more, because about a quarter to a third of our calls get pulled out because they're non-emergent. So, and obviously significantly longer response time, not waiting for traffic and those kinds of things. So the next graph you see with a lot of lines on here, this goes back to 1985 and gives you a historical perspective of our call volume. The top purple line is our total call volume. So in 1985 we were at 1,959 calls total, and in 2013 we had a record year of 5,415 calls for service. The green line is our EMS calls. In 1985 we did 1,195 EMS calls, and last year we did 4,023 calls for EMS service. The red line, the third line down, is our fire calls. In 1985, we were at 764, and in 2013, we were at 1392. So they're pretty stable. They've gone up a little bit, but not nearly as significantly as EMS. The blue line on the bottom signifies actual fires. Well, now whether those are car fires, structure fires, anything that involve flames at some point. And in 1985, we were at 226, and then in 2013, we were at 107. So those have gone down, which is good. You know, and that's an attribution to fire prevention and public awareness of fire prevention and code enforcement and that all that stuff before the call comes in. So
We have more buildings than we had
Yeah.
in 1980.
Yeah.
One of the things is that because we have so many buildings that were built in the 70s,
Yep.
and they're not in today's code, so Chief and Jenny, what's the percentage of our buildings that are compliant with our fire codes now?
Oh, well, to say compliant with the fire code, it's tough. I can tell you that out of our rental housing, our multi-family,
Yeah.
70% of them don't have sprinkler systems.
That's what I was thinking,
I can't
because the
necessarily tell you
majority,
as far as code compliance, 100%, because it changes every 4 to 5 years. But that's one statistic I remember in my head is the majority of them are non-sprinklered.
yeah, and I remember that because of when they were built, and we didn't have the sprinkling code and other codes in effect at that time. And I haven't seen a lot of buildings doing a lot of renovations and upgrading their codes, the buildings to meet code.
Madam Mayor, we're working on that.
Yes, I know, I know.
And so we're getting there, and I would like to say that you'll be seeing more of that in the future, especially with the recent buyout, I guess, or sale of several of our multifamily properties. I mean, it's in their best interest that they have a fire sprinkler system. So I would suspect we'll see at least a couple of buildings upgrade to that.
Yeah,
I think the rental housing program has helped us at least start to educate them on that.
yeah. Because it's a big asset
Absolutely.
for
Absolutely.
those owners. Yeah,
That's right.
yeah.
So this graph is our response time compliance in comparison to our call volume. So this goes back to 2005. The red line is our compliance with the standard that was established, and then the blue line is our call volume. So in 2005, we had 4,430 37 calls for service, and our compliance with the response time standard was 78%. Last year at 5,400 calls for service, we were at a 66% compliance with the response time standard. So you can see the direct correlation of kind of the call volume increasing and the ability to meet that response time standard is decreasing. The next graph I'll show you is our concurrent call volume trend. So these are the number of calls that occur at the same time. So how many calls are we going on that occur at more than one call at a time? So this goes back to 2008, and in 2008 we had 1,726, and in 2013 we had 1,962 concurrent calls. To give you a little historical perspective, back in 1985 we had 232 concurrent calls throughout the year. In 1990 we had 365. In 1995, we had 583. So again, as the call volume goes up, they're going to happen at the same time. They don't spread themselves out, obviously, equally over 24 hours. Otherwise, that would be a lot easier for me and our staff.
Yeah.
Also,
But it's also population growth.
Yeah, absolutely, population growth and aging. And,
Yeah.
Yep. So this kind of plays into how often we're responding from other stations to other areas of the city. We're not in a prime location to respond to those calls. And, you know, when we have more than 2 calls occurring in the city at the same time, we're relying on our mutual aid partners to be the primary responders to those calls. And in 2013, that happened 597 times, where we had 3 or more calls going on at the same time. So we'll try to free up one resource to go assist our mutual aid partners, but we can't handle necessarily with our staffing 3 calls at once. So this next graph explains kind of our mutual aid trends. I'll start with the bottom blue line, and this is the amount of times that we gave mutual aid to our neighbors. So in 2005, we went to fire EMS calls in neighboring communities 70 times, and in 2013 we went 73 times. So that's been pretty consistent. The red line you see is how many times we received fire and EMS mutual aid. So in 2005, that was 147 times, and in 2013, that was 288 times.
Mary?
And go ahead.
Chief, help me understand, when we do call, or when we request aid from a neighboring city, mutual aid,
Yep.
we compensate those cities, don't we?
We do not.
But we do not.
No, we do not compensate them unless it goes beyond goes into some sort of disaster, generally over 12 hours. And
Okay, so
so
how do we make sure everybody kind of gets an equal share here, so that we're not relying too much on one
So-
community without, do they complain?
a little bit, it's good faith. The other thing here is the majority of these are EMS calls, and 70% of those are billable. So, so like when Alina comes into our city, if they transport the patient, they can bill the patient. We don't get any revenue on that. They
get the revenue.
They get the revenue if the patient pays,
Got
and
it.
if they transport.
Okay, okay, I guess I was
So-
thinking fire.
But on
so-
fire, we don't compensate
yeah,
either way.
yeah, okay, that
So,
makes sense.
Yep,
Okay, so the lines you show here is
both.
they're both fire and EMS.
But I would tell you that the fire calls are 20 or less on here on both sides. So the significant portion here is EMS. It's not fire mutual aid back and forth. So, and historically, just to go back a little bit, the number of times we received mutual aid, fire and EMS combined in 1990 was 5 times. In 2000, it was 20 times. So that kind of gives you some historical perspective of how we've increased with our call volume and the assistance we need.
So
The green, oh,
can I just clarify one point?
yeah.
The received
yep,
is when other surrounding fire departments gave us
Help
mutual aid.
us.
correct,
The blue is given.
given, yep,
Pretty big gap.
there
Yeah.
is.
Are they complaining?
I would say there's some concern from the ambulance services. We haven't heard anything from the fire departments because that is a little more symmetrical or reciprocal,
Yeah.
just because it's a lower number. On the EMS side, we've heard some concerns, not anything formally. I would say informal rumblings from some of our peers in neighboring cities about the amount of times that we request it. But no one's really stood out and said, this is a problem. We work very closely with those folks, and they want to help us the best they can. They don't necessarily want to complain. So I don't want to say we've formally got anything complaining.
And this isn't the only thing that we partner with on. There are other pieces to the partnership.
Sure.
So we might be a big receiver than a giver in this area, but is there other things that we do that can help offset that?
We try with training of our neighboring fire departments on certain things. It's a little bit harder on the EMS side with the private ambulance services because of the way they operate. We're more of a beneficiary than able to receive. They're a large system, and for us to really, I don't know that we have much to offer them back as far as anything that would be of value to them. But we definitely try to partner with them and work with them however we can when we have something that's valuable to them. So.
Chief Mary has a question.
And you may have answered this, but I'd like to know more about the disparity between the green line at the top and the red line.
Yep.
What's the difference between requested and received? Is that when they said
Yep. So the
no?
green, no. The green line represents the number of times we've requested mutual aid, and like you said, right off the cuff, you'd say, well, they refused us 200 times last year. No, what happens is, so 484 or 464 times last year we requested mutual aid. So let's say there's a third medical that goes on. We don't have an ambulance. We call for Alina to come in and take that medical for us. Because we have a hospital in our community, lots of times our crews can drop the patient off quickly and turn around faster than that ambulance can get to that next call. So the disparity there is really our crews dropping off patients at Fairview Ridges and making themselves available faster than that ambulance coming from a longer distance can get here. So it might delay our response time because they're dropping off a patient. It takes 5 or 8 minutes to drop that patient off at Fairview Ridges. That ambulance coming from a neighboring community isn't to that scene yet or isn't as close as our ambulance is. They cancel that requested mutual aid ambulance and then take that call.
So when we request a mutual aid ambulance,
Yep.
that's not counted in the response time that we're measuring earlier.
Correct. No, it's not.
So that could be 10 minutes because they're far away.
Correct. Yes, there's no way for us to track that because they're tracked by their dispatch centers.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
So that's an important fact that
Yes,
those are
indeed.
not. Now, there's times where we may have a fire engine that can first respond with medical gear on it, and that would be counted in our response times. But you only see the stuff in the response times that Burnsville Fire responded to.
Mary.
You just opened up another question that I have, if you don't mind. I get questions a lot, and I would guess other council members do as well. Why, when there is a medical call,
Yep.
An ambulance will come and then a fire engine will come?
Yep.
So people say, gee, that wastes a lot of money.
Yeah.
So would you explain that?
Sure. This kind of goes back to what we had talked about, is that we have really a single layered system, and all of our folks are cross-trained as paramedics as well. So the folks on the fire engine are also paramedics, and they're also firefighters. Both the ambulance and the fire engine carry the advanced life support equipment, the life-saving equipment that's needed. And the engine doesn't go on every medical with the ambulance. They go on critical medical. So if it's non-conscious, a chest pain, because we don't have other people first responding with us, we have to carry those patients down. We have a lot of equipment. It takes, a number of paramedics to start IVs and assess the patient. There's a lot that goes on.
More than 2 paramedics.
And we need more than 2 paramedics. So those folks come in the fire engine to assist on that, on critical calls, or if the ambulance is coming from a ways away so that they can get someone there quickly and assess the patient. And what that does is by taking the fire engine, we are adaptable and flexible to respond on whatever that next call may be. When you see how many concurrent calls we have there, we don't know if that next call is going to be a fire call or an ambulance call.
Yeah.
So they can leave from there and go deal with whatever the situation may be.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
So did I explain the green line
Yeah.
enough?
Yeah,
Kinda-
thanks a
Yeah,
lot.
it really
Yeah.
makes a lot of sense. Heather.
One thing I think the chief had mentioned is that you also want to think about what they're tracking. So that green line is likely what other folks are tracking too.
Yep.
So.
Yeah, because in our 73 given to other people, we may not have made it to the scene and everything, but as far as we are considered, we requested resources and vice versa. We're taking resources out of that community to assist us even if they don't get to the scene. So a little bit more on call volume, another graph. I know I've got lots of visual aids today.
It's very good.
Really what this is anytime we have a response time that's significantly delayed, we do a special study on this. And this special study tells us why they were delayed. The crews have to tell us why they were delayed. So the dark blue on the left is 2013, and then the kind of teal color on the right goes back to 2009. So each line is a year. So the biggest thing is call location. That's the tallest bar you see there is call location. Really what that is they may be coming from the other station, they may be coming from another call, or coming from the hospital, causing them a delay to get to the scene, whatever that may be. The next one over is the multiple calls. That's also significant. And then the third one you see is personnel delay. And really what that is they might be at training, and they might have their equipment on, and it takes a little bit to get ready to go. Or they could be in the shower or taking care of personal needs like that. And as we continue to see a rise in call volume, we'll continue to kind of see that personnel delay go up because we're more likely to catch them at training and the other activities they do throughout the day.
Mm-hmm.
So to kind of recap this whole call volume discussion of all those graphs I just showed you, is really we consistently see an increase in EMS call volume. Although our fire call volume is creeping up, it's not at the same rate our EMS call volume is going up. We've seen over the past couple of years, and we'll continue to see the healthcare system evolution. What that means for us, we don't necessarily know in the end, but we look to partner and we look to work with other agencies the best we can and create collaboration models. We see an increased volatile fire load. If you compare 1980s to today, what people put in their houses, everything's synthetics, and you see that fire doubles every 30 seconds. A lot of that has to do with not much as synthetic materials or natural fibers anymore. Everything's synthetic, which is made out of petroleum, burns much faster, makes that tenable situation for a victim much shorter, and makes our ability to mitigate that fire much shorter. So we see that fires are progressing quicker. And the other thing is, in the community, we see an increased at-risk groups, and this is actually a nationwide trend. And those at-risk groups are the elderly, the disabled, and the ethnically diverse. And some national research has shown that those three folks are more likely to need fire and EMS services. And again, that's a national trend, not necessarily locally, but we continue to see that locally as well. So kind of to shift gears into the second piece that affects that response time is staffing. So I kind of got a busy slide here, but I'm a visual person. So what you see here is you see the apparatus that we staff every day, and then you see the fire helmets. The fire helmets are representative of the people that are working on there. So at Fire Station 1, we have an engine that's staffed by a fire captain that's also a paramedic and a firefighter paramedic. The ambulance is staffed by 2 firefighter paramedics, and then Fire Station 2 has 1 fire captain and 2 firefighter paramedics on that engine, and that ambulance has 2 firefighter paramedics. So, just excuse me, to give you some perspective on the staffing that we need to deal with incidents. If we were to have a structure fire, we need a minimum of 5 people to either make a rescue or a fire attack, not both. Since we need 1 person to operate the pump and then 2 crews of 2 to make an effective rescue. And really, in order to sustain that type of effort, we need 15 firefighters on scene to sustain that effort. There's all kinds of other things. We tend to focus on fires because those are probably the most visual and significant things, but car accidents that require extrication, technical rescues, hazardous materials incidents, critical medicals, all those things take a number of people, and we can't just do it with 2 people. We need a team of folks to do that. Again, being dual role, and when the system was set up, we really rely on that ambulance to be available as the crew for that fire engine. So when that ambulance is out at the hospital or that ambulance is taking care of a medical, all we've got is 2 or 3 people on that fire engine. It's not a complete crew to be able to do fire or rescue incidents, and that's one of the challenges we're running into is the more that those ambulances are running on those medical calls, the less they're available to accompany that fire engine to be the crew. Mm-hmm. This just gives you some historical perspective on staffing. Basically, we staffed the same number of vehicles we did in 1985. We staffed 4 vehicles then, 2 at each fire station, 2 ambulances, 2 fire engines. And in 1985, excuse me, we had 24 people. We had 8 people assigned per shift, and then a minimum of 7. So one fire vehicle would have 1 person in it at minimum. And then you get up to where we're at today, and we have 33 people assigned with 11 per shift, 9-person minimums, as you saw on the last slide. Next is geography, kind of the trends we're seeing. The stations were placed in locations before the city was completely developed, and today we kind of see a different city than we did back then with in respects to fire and EMS calls. We also see an increased traffic pattern, as you can imagine. In the early 1990s compared to today, what you see on County Road 42 by Station 1, it's much more difficult to cross or get down County Road 42. Same thing with the increased traffic control devices, whether that's 4-way stops, whether that's roundabouts, whether that's signal lights, those all take time for our staff to get through, even going red lights and sirens. You can't necessarily proceed any faster through those intersections. Seasonal traffic, as we know, between particularly Thanksgiving and Christmas, that shopping area gets very congested, and we have a number of calls that we need to proceed through there. And the other thing I put on here, it doesn't necessarily match the top 4, but hospital destination, and this is where we're very fortunate to have a hospital in our city. 70% of the patients choose to go to Fairview Ridges. If we had a significantly higher patient population that wanted to go downtown at 21 miles each way, whether that's St. Paul or Minneapolis, we'd be taking those ambulances out of service a lot longer and couldn't do those turnarounds where we see that difference between the green line and the red line of requested versus used. Some of the population trends we see is that aging population, and I know we talked about this a couple years ago with the community paramedic stuff, and that we're seeing is obviously the population is aging. Our average patient that we see in the ambulance has increased by 5 years since 2007. So we've gone from an average patient age of 48 to 53. Between the census in 2000, 7% of our population was 65 and over, and as of the 2010 census, 12% was over. And again, that's one of those populations that use our resources. We've seen an increased population, obviously, in the city since 1981. We've seen an increased at-risk population. Again, those were the 3 categories of patients: the elderly, the disabled, and the ethnically diverse. And then we also seen an increased property use that request our service. The senior living, the medical offices, and the multifamily housing tend to use our resources more than the average occupancy. And really, I think we'll continue to see that rise as we become more and more of a healthcare destination and kind of a regional healthcare hub.
Mm-hmm. Mary?
Is there any way to educate what you describe here as the at-risk population? That you just don't call 911 for everything?
Yeah, and we work through that through our fire prevention, and I'd call it all of our prevention program because we work on both fire and EMS stuff through prevention. If you remember, we had that fire prevention grant where we handed out that DVD. Yeah. And I think that's probably helped some of the significant fires we've had. And you're talking about medical.
Yeah,
we can help with some of that. It's difficult though. Mm-hmm. It's really difficult to reach that, and Brian and I have really work to try to integrate with some of that, and we've had a number of discussions with Fairview, and we look to partner with them to do some more education on the front end. Although I wouldn't say I think lots of times we tend to think there's a lot of abuse there. I don't think there's a lot of misuse of that. There's some, but I don't think it's the greatest percentage of what we're dealing with. Okay. I think by doing education, what I foresee by us doing some education on that is we'll slow the rise, but I don't think we'll stop or stagnate the rise in EMS call volume.
Yeah. Okay.
So I don't know if that makes sense to you, but I think that's.
Thank you. Yeah.
I think we'll slow that by partnering with Fairview and doing some things.
Chief, on all of the different seniors that we have, and a lot of them, because when I visit our senior housing, they all have medical alerts.
Sure.
And so we work with those services then, because when they fall or something, that alert the service, and then the service makes the telephone call for that individual, correct?
Yeah, and technology is really advanced with a lot of that. Mm-hmm. They try to make contact. There's actually an ability to do two-way voice communications through those. So lots of times what they'll do is they'll call a family member first. So,
Okay.
you see the commercials, I've fallen and I can't get up, and they call the ambulance and we rush over and take care of them. I would say that happens occasionally, but I would say the majority of the time the family member gets notified, they come take care of them. We do get medical alert calls, but again, it's not a huge percentage of
Okay. I
patient
just wanted to
population.
know, because when I'm visiting with the different facilities throughout our city,
Yep.
I see most of them have medical alerts.
And when you see places that have 24-hour staff, the staff will go there first and evaluate them, and then call us if necessary.
Yeah.
So, yep. Back to my pictures here.
I like
This-
the pictures.
This graph is responses by property type. The blue bar is the 2013 numbers, and the red bar is the 2006 numbers. And the first column you see is a multifamily dwellings. So we had roughly 1,600 calls to multifamily dwellings in 2013. And then the second column over is the one or two family dwellings, the single family homes that we go to. But then you get over to that third bar here, and that's a 24-hour nursing care or assisted living with 4 or more people that has 24-hour staff. Then you get over to clinics and doctor's offices, and then hotel, motel, residential board and care with. So that's generally like group homes and that with less than 4 people, and then jail and police station being the last. So you see, we spend a significant amount of time at multifamily dwellings, those care facilities, and the senior facilities. Kind of that last piece we talked about that really affects response times are the technology and equipment. And really over the past years in the department, past 10 years, is we've really focused on how do we create some efficiencies using technology and equipment. And we've done a lot with electronic efficiencies. We've gone to electronic faxing of our patient care reports. So the paramedics no longer stay at the hospital to complete their patient care report. They can write it on the way back to the fire station and make them available, and then electronically it gets transmitted back to the hospital. We used to spend 20 minutes or a half hour at the hospital writing a report. That's no longer necessary. Electronic records management system. In the future, we're in the middle of some projects right now implementing a new computer-aided dispatch system with DCC and Logis in 2015. We're also working on a new station alerting system, and the Lions Club has generously donated and helped make that a feasible project for us. So really what we've worked on is how do we increase our crew availability and the location factors? How do we get them back to the stations? And so we've done that with some electronics. Also reliable and identical fleet. If our fire trucks are going down for maintenance frequently, that becomes an issue for us to be available. We use priority dispatch, that emergency medical dispatch, which we've been doing for a number of years in Burnsville, gets that right resource going, so we're not sending fire engines on every call, so we have some resources available. Our mutual aid partnerships, as I discussed earlier, all of our surrounding communities and ambulance services have been wonderful to work with and have been very supportive of us. The last thing we've done is online training. Our folks do a lot of online training to keep them available so we're not congregating in one area. Again, trying to reduce that call location factor. So again, the efficiencies that we've tried to gain through technology and equipment have been nearly exhausted, and it's really only gained us seconds in the grand scheme of response times. We haven't had significant progress in this area, even with our attempts. So as I put in the background, I think it really comes down to really 4 options. And again, not that we're looking for a decision to hear, but from my perspective or staff's perspective, there's really 4 options to fixing it or addressing it. Is can we modify our staffing levels to meet the increasing service demands? Can we evaluate station locations and possible need for future stations? Can we continue to evaluate and implement collaboration models? And then the last one would be to modify the response time expectation. And again, like I'd put in the background, from the staff perspective, we would recommend going with the top 3. And again, we're not looking for a decision today, and we understand that it would be a long-term solution. It's not an overnight fix to really any of this. It's it's happened over time. It's going to take time to address. But we wanted to make sure that you had the information and let you know that we're doing everything we can to maintain those efficiencies and effectiveness of our department to maintain the expectations within the community and meet those expectations and deliver the best service possible. So with that, I would stand for any questions. Assistant Chief Carlson and I would
Okay.
answer any questions you may have.
Bill?
So just to help further clarify. So, for example, in Egan and Lakeville, the entire ambulance service is underwritten by a different private entity, correct? Not by the citizens of those cities, is that correct?
That is correct.
And for how much time, but I assume also that their fire trucks also still go out to an emergency in those cities as well. So they do have some cost associated with emergency.
But they also respond two police officers to every medical ahead of time. So there's a commitment on the police department side, and they've trained their police officers more than we've trained ours. And the other thing with those private ambulance services is they depend on a large geography to absorb that. So Egan may not have an ambulance sitting in their city. Health East, for example, covers all but 5 cities in Dakota County. And they deploy their ambulances based on where the next call is likely to be. And so that response time can vary because you're not necessarily guaranteed an ambulance in your city. Same thing with Alina. They use the system status management to make their ambulances available to the best ability they can with the number that they have available. Does that answer your?
Mostly.
Okay.
Anything else? Because one of the things that we talked about was the response time, and I'm hearing the chief say, let's leave that for now until we have better and until we really understand. The thing that you're going to be working on is looking at staff, because when I read this background and I saw that we have the same staffing component today at 60,000 people when we had less than 30 in 1985. And the community has developed, fully developed, and back then we were less than 50% developed. So you are looking at the staffing level, whether we're appropriately staffed to today's population, or council, do we want staff to spend that time evaluating those 3 items and to come back with us with other information? Bill?
I'm not against evaluating all 3 items as long as they do a cost analysis.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, because all of that.
Because what I worry about, in the modern world is, what do we get reimbursed 70% of the time for?
We transport about 70% of the patients. So we don't bill for those non-transports unless it's a cardiac arrest. So,
but have we ever figured out how much reimbursement we get out of the 70%, the folks we actually transport?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so we could do a cost-benefit analysis of all 3 or something like that.
Yeah. And I'm interested in seeing that, because we've looked at those numbers before, but I think they've changed quite a bit. The other is the staffing level, and I don't know about the location. I still want to, because it looks like we have a good mutual aid understanding, but Chief, you're going to have to give us more information if you're going to evaluate that.
Okay.
Because we also have a mutual aid with Savage, correct?
Correct. We have fire mutual aid with.
So on the west side, I'm just looking at the west side because we're dealing with, well, Station 1 covers south and west, and 2 covers east and south as well. So
Yeah, we have mutual aid partnerships with all 5 surrounding communities. The challenge is that they're all paid on call departments, and for the time you call, it takes time for them to be alerted and respond to the station and get there. But yeah, we can maybe shed more light on that.
yeah, and that's what, that number 3, it's how well are we leveraging that, and are we getting what we need? And also be honest with us with how our neighbors, because we don't want to be abusing that relationship or to be at the table saying, let's take a look at how much time you're taking from us, and
Sure.
because we're not charging them and they're not charging us.
Sure.
Yeah. But it's a whole different time that we're living in, and we have more people living in the city. But we did sell the southern property that was supposed to be Station 3. That's on South Cross and Portland.
Portland, yeah.
Yes, Jenny.
Madam Mayor, we still own that.
Oh, we didn't sell it? It didn't go with the flower development? Because
No.
didn't they buy part of that?
No,
What
not-
did they leave? What did
not
they
yet.
leave? An acre?
There is about, an acre and a half on the
Yeah,
corner of
'cause
South
they
Cross
took-
and Portland, I want to say, right next to Wildflower Development.
Yeah, the wildflower.
And just, I want to say 2006, we went out for RFP, we had some, a buyer, and then that fell through a couple of times, and then the recession hit, so we do still own that property.
Yeah, because I remember that we had that property, and I thought Wildflower took all of it. No, they left the one that's right on
Corner.
South Cross with that little big
Kind
dip.
of a hill there, yes.
Yeah. It's what the developers call dogs. Hard to develop. So they took the best part and left the dip. Okay. Okay.
Well,
So, Mary.
I just want to second what Bill said. I mean, I think that you made very clear the growth in the needs and why it's growing and where it's growing, and all of your charts were excellent. Is there a way that if citizens would like to see those graphs, that they can get a hold of those? Could you post those somewhere?
They're online?
I'm sure we can.
Well, could you make sure they're online? Yeah, that'd be nice, because I think that if we do increase, and I'd like to see what you would propose with the costs, because nothing is free. As Bill pointed out, he'd like to see the costs. I would too, but I think that if that's the case, then we would have to really sell it to the community, because they will have to pay for it.
Right.
Yeah. And I think that's all part of this, is being very transparent.
Yeah.
And I just want to let our citizens know that www.burnsville.org, go to 4/14/2014 council agenda, and this is on video, and they can pull up the video on this.
Well, they can
session.
pull up the video, but I guess I'm really interested
And-
in making sure that those graphs are available.
Yeah, and the
Madam
graphs are,
Councilmember, sure, we'll make sure that we
Okay.
post it on the same link. So
Yeah,
that when they
great.
go to the April 15th council meeting agenda,
Yeah,
that we can
good.
put that right there
Thank
too,
you.
as one of the
because all of the
Well, they
graphs
can
that
see
we've
the
seen.
video, but
the
but
graph-
be able to just,
Look at all of the graphs. they're-
just look at them the way we could look at them online. I think that would be a little more
Yeah, and-
user-friendly.
Yeah, and that they can do that too, but they can also have the graph while the chief is stepping
Oh, yeah,
through all of
which
it
is
like
very
we have.
important. Yeah.
Yeah, so they can have both,
Yeah,
but.
Thank
yeah.
you.
But just to let them know that they can have the chief stepping them through the graphs also. So I think, Suzanne, what are you thinking, having the chief do some of that study and come back with what the costs would be? Dan?
Yeah, I question.
Yes.
It looks to me like real fires, actual fires, not real fires, but forest fire, has remained pretty flat, and it's just really EMS
Yep.
is where all the demand is. What kind of station or outfit or equipment and manpower would we be looking at to just address where the increased demand, which doesn't require another big, huge fire truck, because we're not looking to put out more fires. We're actually containing the fires, and we have no real significant growth in fires, but we have a incredible growth in ambulance calls, basically. And so when I think of our fire department, I think of fire suppression first and ambulance second. But really, when you look at the data,
Right.
we're an ambulance service first, and fire suppression when needed, and it's not needed as much. So how do you see responding to that in the future? Because it doesn't look like we're going to have more fires. It looks like we're just going to continually have more and more EMS calls, ambulance-related calls versus fire calls. So is a firehouse required? Is another fire truck required? Or is it just more ambulance and more EMS trained staffing?
And I think that's where we can come back with
Yeah.
a number of options. and look at that. Obviously, addressing the EMS call volume would take an ambulance, not necessarily, like you said, a fire truck, to address the capacity of the EMS system and what that staffing model might look like. I think we can do some more modeling of when those calls are and, how frequent, and if there's some staff, some staff dynamics that we can create to create some efficiencies in that as well. But yeah, we can bring back some ideas. But like you said, I think the ambulance would be an important piece of that. Obviously, location is an important piece of that, and depending on how we want to address that, I mean, that could be part of the things that we bring back on what areas are we having difficulty reaching in, and what would those options gain us. So
And it might be, my hope is that as staff takes a look at that, because one of the things that we did on the community paramedic was to look and see if we could partner with the hospital. And perhaps instead of another location, maybe the hospital. I don't know. But until you do that kind of analysis and find out if there's, instead of building another, but until they do that analysis, we don't know.
Agreed.
Yeah.
It's something that's time has come for us to look at, because the pressure's been building, the demand is growing, and we need to reevaluate the model that we're using and the equipment and the staffing and the locations and everything.
And I see that because on the monitoring report, and I think that's once a month when I see your data and I see police data, and I'm always looking to see how much more is that medical service. And that's why I was, whenever someone comes in and they want another senior housing, I always think about the service cost to us.
Sure.
What all of that means. More capacity.
In-house ambulance service for each development, maybe.
Yeah, Bill.
And again, we're all on the same page because, of course, there's worst case situation to best case situation. I'm hoping when the information comes back that it's easy versus a difficult decision, and I think so we're all on the same page. I mean, obviously it's a lot easier to add one ambulance and 4 guys, because you can go up and down, you can get rid of an ambulance, you can get rid of 4 guys, can't get rid of a firehouse. So we're all on the same page in that regard, but it needs to be looked at so that then we can decide against it. So
but
we're all on the same page.
But I think, Chief, the information you gave us today is excellent information, because it gives us a really great view of what that operation is today. And I really appreciate your re-articulating that we are operating in the same model since 1984. And it's a whole different community since 1984. And it's time for us to take a look at that. And the only way we can make a good decision is we get the information. But tonight's information was excellent to give you some direction.
Thank you.
We had, I think the chart had 30, in 1884, was it 33 fire personnel, and we're at 39. So we've still got 2 stations, pretty much the same equipment. We've just added a few more personnel to be able to somewhat respond to the volume of calls, and rotating shifts and whatnot. But very interesting data. Is that when the second firehouse was built? When was the second one built?
Actually, Station 2 used to be up on Cliff Road, so we've kind of always had 2 stations, but it was on Cliff Road, and then 1989, Station 2 moved to 122nd Parkwood there.
When did both of them get built? We're in our 50th anniversary. Just go back 50 years when they were built.
Station 1, I don't know the exact date. I got the plans in my office. I want to say early 70s. It was the police station for a while.
It was.
When we were in public safety. And then when we separated from public safety, that became the fire station.
Gotcha. And then is that when number 2 was built? I know this is a Burnsville Historical Society question, potentially.
No,
but,
actually, we have the data and all of that.
Yeah, I just don't have it handy. I can't remember.
So, we have, but for the most
But it
part,
was
in the modern history of Burnsville, we've had 2 fire stations manned by, X number of people, and we haven't added them. And I know that we have a different model than some of our neighboring cities with more firehouses and a volunteer force.
Correct.
And so there's advantages and disadvantages with both. So, again,
and they have
it's a
more
good time for us to do this
equipment,
study.
but they have to equip those, because we looked at that. They have firehouses, and when you have those firehouses, they have to have equipment. And I've been to some of those firehouses, especially the ones on
It's more
Hagan.
capital versus more labor.
Yeah.
hours.
And ours is really a high active serviced firehouses. There are some that are museums.
Still mostly working.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Chief, was there anything else that you needed from us? I think you have some direction.
I think that's the direction. I appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you. Heather, anything else? That's okay.
Thank you.
All righty, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And we now move on to our roundtable items. And there's one item on the roundtable, and that is Councilmember Keeley, a discussion on the city's level of support for legacy events.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I brought this issue up because, for a few reasons, but we have, I've received an official, I guess call it official word today from former Councilmember Dan Gustafson that the Art and All That Jazz Festival is no longer going to happen, period. Not just last year or this year, but in perpetuity. So it is something that we as a council would need to handle removing from our legacy events schedule. And the other part of this is, and we have some budgetary funds that we had in the last couple of years that we've obviously set aside, didn't spend last year, wouldn't spend this year, theoretically, in Art and All That Jazz. But the other thing is, and this actually I have to explain, this didn't come about as a result of me taking over the liaison for Fire Muster. This has been actually in the back of my mind for years, since we changed to the current model back in the deep part of the recession and we made the cutbacks. And we made a decision back then to essentially cluster all. We created a new structure or process for events and just put the 4 key events back then into this legacy event group, and we cut our funding from what was 100% back then to 50% as a result of the recession. And so now that we're out of that, mostly out of that recession, but we're not completely out, I've been reflecting back on the Fire Muster itself, and this has absolutely I want to say up front, this has absolutely nothing to do with the Heart of the City 10K, which migrated from its original date as the Tender Hearts into the Fire Muster. That to me is in a different level of event or festival. It's always struck me that the Fire Muster was the true legacy event in the city. It goes back decades. Its historical significance for the community is far greater than what the Art and All That Jazz was for the 10-year or 8-year, how many years it was. Certainly for the Tender Hearts and for the International Festival, those came along much later in life, and they are events that we enjoy today and we like having. Unfortunately, Art and All That Jazz is now gone. And so what I would recommend, what I'd like to do is, and what I'm requesting staff support on, is 2 things. Number one, I would like to move the Art and All That Jazz funding that we have in our budget and shift it over to the Fire Muster. It equates to about $4,200 because the total city costs for the last few years that the Art and All That Jazz happened was about $8,500. So half of that is what the city has funded, and the other half was funded by the organizer, or I guess refunded the city to the organizer, by the organizer. And I'd like staff to look at, take a look at how we fund and treat and class our community or organization events. My suggestion is that the Fire Muster be in what I would call it a Tier 1, because it really is the true legacy event. It goes back far greater than the others. And for us to consider a higher level of contribution as a city. And I'm going to base that in a lot of things, but what I'm trying not to do is say I want to put more money into, net more money into what we're doing. I just want to shift what Art and All That Jazz would have received this year in support and move that into the fire muster. But this is a very big year for the fire muster and for the city. It's the 50th anniversary, so it should be a very significant celebration for our community. The fire muster should have some things going on with it that are different from any other year as a 50th year. And I think, beyond just this request tonight, but to also ask, the part two of that is to ask staff to maybe go back and look and bring us some options to look at how would we structure this. I would also recommend that we, in that process, that we get away from the percentage and go to a fixed dollar support so we can budget a little easier. Because if you notice in the historical, the numbers kind of bounce around a little bit. They're not huge variances, but it might be a little easier for all of us, both the events, and I'm not going to speak for the events, but if I was, running one, and I'm close to the 10K, of course, but I don't chair that, it would be a lot easier just to fix a number. And I think for the city, from my city council position, I would like to see it just be a fixed number that we have in our budget. The other thing is, when I got onto the fire muster, and I haven't even made it to a meeting yet, by the way, under full disclosure. It's just happened a couple months ago, and I haven't got to a meeting because it's hitting on two difficult days. But so that's just to let you know, this isn't as a result of a conversation with the fire muster board. This is something that I have felt strongly about for a long time, and really just decided now's the time to bring it up. And ironically, today is when I found out that the Art and All That Jazz is no longer going to be around. So interesting how things sort of just happen. But I want to cite one example that I think all of us need to think about. Our area communities do a very good job of supporting their, what I would consider, we could call their legacy community festivals. And this gets to something, Madam Mayor, that I know you've talked about a lot, is there's a lot of things that we do and we have as amenities and value in the city that makes it a very high quality life. Quality of service from the city is outstanding, quality of our parks. And the fire muster is the one big community festival that truly defines community festival. And I think we need to reevaluate what we're doing as a city in supporting that one festival. For instance, Apple Valley, I just called them out of the blue. I just picked any of them, and that was the one that I knew a couple council members, and so I first looked up their phone number, and I ended up calling the city and getting the person who is in charge of their Freedom Days. And I asked them, what do you do? And they support 100%, as we used to, of the public safety for Freedom Days and parks and street support. They also sponsor 100% of the cost of their fireworks show. And under full disclosure, my kids went to 196, so I went to that fireworks show for a long time now, and I haven't been there in a while, but I go to the fire muster show as well. They have a very impressive show. And in addition to the 100% public safety and 100% of the cost of the fireworks show, they also contribute additional $12,000 to that event. The event is organized by a whole lot of volunteers, just like our fire muster is. And so they really are behind their legacy community festival. And I know why we cut from 100% to 50%. I was part of that vote, and I voted in favor of it, and there was very good reason. We're at a different time now, and I think it's time that we re-looked at how we fund the fire muster as a city. I know that we do a ton. It's not just the dollars that you see, that I see 2013's been added in, that 30, low 30s and high 20s that dropped last year. There's a lot of staff costs, about $6,600. So we do a lot. The city does a lot. The staff puts forward an enormous amount of time. And I really, truly believe this is our legacy event, the fire muster, and we do a lot together. There's a dollar and cents related to some of this that I think we could learn from our sister cities what we might need to consider again. And so that's sort of like phase two. That's ask staff to look into this, bring back some recommendations. For this year, I would like to move the Art and All That Jazz over the city's portion over to the fire muster, and I'd really like to, if we had any unspent funds, add a little bit more. I'd like to add the whole 8,000 because, ironically, that's similar to a request that they had for some additional fireworks to make our 50th anniversary year a little bigger and brighter and sparklier with a fireworks show. So with that, I would like to ask the Fire Muster Chair, Tom Taylor, if he would, to come to the table and speak to this as well, and then entertain the...
I want to go to our city manager, because one of the things that I do know, and if you remember, there is no money. Come to the table, Tom. We do not give any of our events any dollars. It all comes out of staff time.
Madam Mayor, that was exactly what I was going to just say, is that these are all in the operating budgets. We don't have the separate accounts where we move it from one to the other.
Yeah.
If we were to dedicate additional resources, which that is certainly in the council, if you wanted to change your policy, that's certainly something you could do. But that would just mean that those dollars would not be spent on other operating types of costs within those departments. So what this does is we code the time for the overtime, and that's how we come up with these estimates, and that's really what they are, as estimates. But it is actually within the operating budgets of these departments. So I want to make sure that was clear.
We don't, no money is transferred.
I understand what it is.
Yeah.
And what I'm talking about is the money, which for art and all that jazz, as you see, it's in police, which I'm assuming that $3,000 for 2012 is probably overtime. And so we're not going to have that overtime. So that $3,000 is not going to get spent in that, and we've spent about that for 3 years in a row.
It wouldn't be spent on overtime for that particular festival. There may be other costs that they would then use that money for.
Exactly, and that's what I'm suggesting is we use that for the fire muster to bolster that, and that might be in the terms of.
Are you suggesting we now give cash? No, just time.
Yeah, we're essentially, let's look at the fire muster. We're billing, it looks like about 11 to 14,000 it's been down, but so on average of $12,000 a year, right? And we've requested for half of that to come back. So we would request less to come back because we're not incurring the $3,000 overtime in the police up here in the art and all that jazz.
Okay.
So we're not incurring it there, so shift it down to there.
Okay.
That's my question. That's what I'm suggesting.
Because I'll have some questions for Tom. So, Tom, you had something to say?
I appreciate what you're saying. I mean, we have been around, for 35 years in it, and it was when the impact came of when they cut back to half. I mean, it was kind of glass half full, glass half empty. One thing was it did force us to be much more effective in management of money. In fact, we didn't know how much the city was putting in when, figuring out what terms of dollars and how much was being spent with it. But it has, since that time, it's become a real struggle just to make things happen. I think we've managed this thing very, very well. I mean, Jim Marcicho and Ken Slipka before me, the team we have in place now are all very good, effective managers. We've done a lot with expanding things out. There's other things we've had to do with cut things back. We had the block party going on a Wednesday night. We've had to cut that back. Our goal was to expand. We had other events going on Monday and Tuesday, wine tasting, other things that were going on with it. And we've had to make some cutbacks just to make sure it's survival. But last year when we look at the festival, was if all the stars were aligned. I mean, it was absolutely perfect. We had beautiful weather. Okay, we had great bands. We brought in great bands, wonderful publicity. Everything was. All the stars were aligned to have a great festival. And despite the record crowds, those type of things, despite the really strong management that we had in place, cost control measures that we've taken every year with that, we lost money. I mean, we're nonprofits, so we operate at a deficit. And we're at a point now where, and all festivals, to a large extent, are susceptible to weather. But because we have no assured funding sources each year, we're impacted heavily by sponsorship, which has gone down overall year after year. Some years we've had a little bit of spike, and then everything else is pretty much just gate receipts for what we can get in. We're one bad round of weather away from being in really financial jeopardy. And when we look at the festival, I'm sure that's the reasons why other organizations like Apple Valley, Savage is my understanding, some of the other ones, that they do a substantial more as far as support that, that they provide. We've heard and talked to other locations or other community festivals, and the information I've received is anecdotal on what type of support they give. So I really would support Councilman Keeley's request that let's start with a study to look at and see what do other communities provide. What are they doing to support their primary community festivals? And then that being a starting place. And then see what does the city really want out of a festival? What do they expect? Is there any expectation whatsoever? Does it add? Where does it fit in that quality of life and that making us a livable city? So kind of lead the process through that. That's what I'm asking. In addition to helping us for this year, because it will be a tight year for us.
How much do you raise in sponsorship?
It varies in years, anywhere from about $20,000 to $30,000, somewhere there. Our budget's about $90,000. I think last year, because we took on the beer tent now, I think we hit $100,000 for the first year.
And your sponsorship's around $30,000?
Right around that level.
Okay. Yeah, because I think one of the beauty of what was there before also is that it's a community event where people contributed to it.
Yeah.
So it was a partnership.
In what way were they?
Meaning that it wasn't all being sponsored by the city, the citizens.
Yeah.
It was the people of the community also. Yeah. There were a lot of people at the very beginning who put so much in, and it's not. The organization that's now no longer Junior.
Oh, the JCs.
JCs.
Right.
They were a big contributor, and they were the ones who started this because Darwin Bolton and Kurt Detlefson and Glenn McKee and some of the other folks who had fire trucks. So it started there, but they didn't ask the city for, if I remember correctly from conversations.
It really started out, from history, it really started out as just a gathering of fire truck owners. And then it began to be a little bit more and more. And then at one point it did say, hey, let's make this into a community festival. Yeah. And over the years...
And they were down at Diamond Head Mall.
Right. That's absolutely where it started. And it was just a small thing. And if that's what the community and the city would like to go back to, that may be what happens with so many few fire truck collectors around today. It really would be there. But the mission of the Fire Muster... at least since the management team that has been in there now, the executive committee that's been in there now, and probably the 10 years before that, really made it into a community festival. Yeah. And we worked very, very hard at making this the one time of the year that everybody in the community has an opportunity to get together. We really work hard to address every aspect of our community, from seniors and getting them involved both in attendance as well as participation, to the schools and what they can participate in, to the sports athletic organizations, to the businesses. We work very, very hard to do that, and we think it's important. We think that really adds significantly to the to the community. I mean, for a business to be able to get out there and to expose themselves, of what they have for their products or services, things like that, for community groups to get along. And there's things we have even bigger plans for that we set out a couple of years ago that we frankly had to shelve. One is to have a tent just dedicated to nonprofit organizations looking for volunteers. There's not a better place and time than that time. So there's a lot of things we would like to do, but when the financial impact hit us in, I think it was 2009 was the first year it hit, or was 2010? At that point,
was when we started to really feel it, and we started to.
Yeah, that's when it really became evident to us, and we were able to work very hard on increasing the amount of sponsorship we have, but it is unreliable, and it has hit the point that it is on a decline. We're competing for not just a smaller pool of money, but also against many, many organizations asking for funding of things. The same people that the Friends of the Performing Arts Center are going after is the same group we're approaching. Same people going for the new scoreboard at the high school. That's the same group that that we're going to track from. The days of having the JCs involved is wonderful. It was wonderful. It was a great time, but they really became down where there were only a handful of members, and we had to take over the beer tent. I mean, we had to take it over. It was not. They were unable to manage it at that point. They just didn't have the numbers.
Mm-hmm. Bill, you had your hand up? Okay. Mary?
Just a couple of questions. Based on my attendance since the very beginning and in recent years, am I correct that many of the our firefighters, other city employees used to volunteer their time?
That was before my time. My understanding was that there was more involvement by volunteers with the city employees.
But I don't know if that's possible anymore because the law has changed.
Liability is one issue.
Liability. So that's something, again, beyond your control, beyond anybody's control for any of these events. And you could add that to the decline of the JCs and all of that. So, but I am aware when you added the beer tent, I would think that because I worked it several years, that should provide quite a bit of money.
It has added some, but the net that it's brought in is less than $10,000 when it comes down to the net.
Really?
We think maybe we're not charging enough. That may be part. We hear there's elasticity with people drinking, the market elasticity. You drop a beer, you raise it by 50 cents, you get that.
I was going to say, at 5 o'clock, charge $2, at 6 o'clock, $3.
We haven't announced it, but it may go up a little, the price of beer.
Yeah, because I know I've been just joined the International Festival Board, and I have to say, and I don't want to put this in terms of competition, but I was stunned when I found out how much money they get from sales of I don't think they sell any alcohol. Oh,
yeah, we do.
That's right there. But anyway, concessions.
Yeah, but we don't. Yeah, we only get a percentage.
And it's something we've worked at, increased year over year. We're looking at strategies to do that.
Yeah.
To be that. But remember, and this is somewhat with it. Where do you draw the line on how much you want to, push people to drink? This is really one of the discussions we have. This is a family.
It's food.
It's
family.
Food.
Food is another area with it that we bring vendors in. There's different models we can look at. We've going back to when Jim and Ken really looked at this thing, they set out certain goals with what it has to be and the different aspects of it. And how is it best managed? How do you mitigate or minimize the risks that you're exposed on, different things? And that's why we have the model today. I mean, it would be wonderful to have it a completely open festival where we wouldn't have to do buttons, or buttons could be optional to make it all-inclusive. Can't work. Not in this environment. The idea with having a certain proportion funded from sponsorship, a balance, and I couldn't tell you what those numbers are with what was originally set as a goal, and then we carried on, but a certain amount from sponsorship dollars, certain amount from gate receipts, certain amounts from city support was what it was built around. And then a little bit from some of the other things. The beer tent came in and has helped offset some of the expense that we've had here. On some of it. So, those things have brought out, have all tried to offset and bring some of the things. But it still comes down to, the dedicated funding source is so important.
Okay.
And we're not asking, bottom line is we're not asking anything other than different of what is consistent with what goes on into other areas. In other communities. What do the majority?
But I think we have to look at Burnsville and say, what is it that we want? Do we want the model where our community is part of really making it happen, rather than having the city be the funder of everything? For us, we always leverage partnerships.
Yeah. And I agree.
That's our model, and it works for us.
And I will tell you that when there was a cost-sharing basis coming down, it forced our organization to look at things differently. The parade, moving this from Sunday to Saturday, the community parade, was an economic decision, in addition to others, but a major driving factor. So absolutely, those things are really important. And I don't think we'd ever look at the point of saying this should all be funded by the city. I mean, it would open up so many different
I mean,
things.
because I mean, Dan is saying that Apple Valley is funding all of that 100%. I don't think that's not our model. We want our community to be part of it. And people feel good when they're part of giving to something. They take ownership of it.
Yes.
And if they're not part of it, they don't have any ownership. They come, and it's, again, a consumer. They just come and do, and then they're not. We want people to be part of the community. And it's always worked well for us to have that kind of partnership. And so I don't know what other communities, but I think it's good to understand what they do, but I think we have to look at what we want to be, because we need to be consistent in terms of the things that we do. We just talked about EMS services, EMS and fire, and it's about leveraging the partnerships we have with our neighbors.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that works well. I think we just have to look and see what is appropriate when we look at other legacy. Dan is offering that we look at this differently in a two-tier system. That means that we look at how much we fund our staff support. You know, right now it's, Heather, is it 50% across the board
Yes.
on all? Yeah.
The liaison planning hours that aren't reimbursed,
Yeah.
I think we got 60.
Yeah, the liaison are excluded. Thank you.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
staff
Yep.
and all that kind of stuff. So it's police, fire, public works, and parks.
Yeah.
Hard costs, I guess, or staff costs.
Overtime.
Yeah,
Oh,
and no, it's
primarily
the overtime
right.
that I'm looking at, that's the
Yep.
cost. But even if we raise it, that goes to your bottom line, Mary.
Well, I understand what you say, and because I've been here since the beginning, and I know many of those people from JC's and remember when they were around. The reality is, we do not have an organization to bring that kind of energy and community sourcing of energy into any event, any festival event in the city right now. We don't.
No.
We don't.
But we have a group, that's the Fire Muster Board.
But we have a board, and I think you've done a wonderful job in reinventing, because I remember the low point, and we wondered whether this was really going to survive.
Well, there was some really difficult times back then, and I remember because we had to step in and resurrect it, because frankly, Councilmember Crichton, Charlie, was not very happy because when we were supporting a lot of the Fire Muster, and when we needed, and the Rotary too, needed some feedback as to how their money was being spent, what was the income, and what they wouldn't disclose any of that.
That was a bad time.
And so that's when we stepped in and said, if you want us to continue, that's when Liz Workman was the liaison from the council, and she was the one who then recruited Jim Marchessault, and then Ken Slepta from the...
started to climb back up.
Yes.
Right.
But that's...
Yes.
Yeah.
But to go back to my point, and that is to see the Fire Muster Board as a community group with the same kind of community glue, not to take anything away from the board, but to have that same kind of glue that an organization like the JCs, like the Lions, like these other community groups, which are not as strong in terms of just the global sense as they used to be, it makes it really tough.
So what are you suggesting?
I don't know what I'm suggesting.
Just 2 points.
I'm just suggesting that...
No, I understand that, but I see there's an evolution.
That maybe we cannot just say that we've got to go back to having...
No, I'm not suggesting that. Not at all. I'm suggesting that the partnership be that we can't have the city fund it 100%.
No, I'm not saying that either.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying that I want to. Well, go ahead. Continue. Some others want to talk.
I think the only proposal on the table I've heard is that, are we willing to commit half? First, Dan asked for half, and then he asked for all the 8,000, but he really asked for half.
Well, it's the city's half, or the part that the city bore.
Right.
Not the...
Are we willing to, that's what I hear is on the table this year. That's what I heard Tom asked for, in addition, separately asked for, but also next year and then on look at this
Yeah.
issue. So really the issue before us is, are we willing to put half of what we would have spent on all that jazz into the pot to offset or assist in
Yeah,
firemen?
that's what I heard also, but I also heard something else, because
Part two.
the part two
Yeah,
of
and
yours
that's for more discussion and later work. Really,
Yeah.
we're addressing with this year.
is that, and we need to make sure that we address the policy if we're going to do,
That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Is to go back
It's
and
the
look at our existing
policy.
policy and
and what you're asking for is art and all that jazz was the 8,000, and you want the 8,000 to be, or 4,000
Sure.
of the 8. I mean, because I think
Well,
it's
here,
4.
let me and Heather can answer.
That
the
means
question
it's,
of whether
and
it is or not
and we
there.
just all understand that is just overtime, and there is not going to be any money
Yeah, no, it's-
exchanging hands.
It's overtime that we are not going to pay for this festival. Okay.
Yeah,
It's the
yeah.
half that's reimbursed.
I'm going to go to Heather, and then I'll come to you, Bill.
And I just want to be clear, we didn't spend this money in
That's right.
2013, so it's not in the budget.
That's
and so
right.
that would be additional money
That's
that we
right.
would find within the operating budgets
That's
of
right.
the departments. I
That's
just
right.
want to be clear that
That's right.
what is being requested, because this is, we didn't have a festival last year, so
Yeah.
Right. And what if we'd have had it this year? What would have happened?
we would have to find out those resources.
That's
You're
right.
I mean, I'm
I didn't realize it got plugged out of the budget before I found out even
Well,
today
yeah.
that it was permanently canceled.
No,
But that's
no,
not
but it's
that
never
big.
been a separate budget. Is my point. So
Well,
these
you
are
had
other
to
resources.
factor in spending it and get reimbursed for half, so it had to be factored in some budget.
What we don't do
somewhere.
is we don't do other operations. Like, for example, what we would have done for overtime, we might have spent that overtime doing potholes,
Yeah.
for example, in Public Works.
That's
Or in
right.
police, we would have spent that overtime.
Yeah, that's what
November, we do an accounting of where we're at with
Right.
the festivals for the year, and whatever we have
wanna
left
be-
is what we dedicate to maintenance for the year. So because it's
Gotcha.
kind of been a moving target
Yeah, just
historically.
wanna-
Gotcha.
So when we budget, we don't actually
say
say
this
we're
is
going to allocate this much for. We have history,
Overtime.
We have some history experience here, so we try
Sure.
to do that, and
Yeah.
we have plenty to do. So it's not, So I think that's what
Just
at
for
the end of the month.
Okay, just for the citizens' sake, so they have confidence in our budgeting, I know that you know that money is there and it's part of a number that's in our numbers, that this just isn't as a fuzzy thing that we just sort of move around. You know what I'm saying? No, you know that we've experienced it for several years. We know that expense exists, that overtime comes around, and we know that there's a reimbursement for half of that from the event.
Overtime is fluid on an annual
Right,
basis.
but it is-
snow, all those things. This year, for example, we will be, even with this, we'll be over in overtime
That's
Public
right.
Works because of the thing. So,
Sure.
so what it goes to is our overtime every year for police, fire, and Public Works has a wide plus or minus margin. And so what we do, we get to November, we try to get ourselves as close back to budget as we can. It is factored in, but overtime is no pun intended, is a liquid situation somewhat throughout the year. And so.
And in
yes. Go ahead, and then I'll go to Bill. He's waiting.
And in police and fire, how they tend to manage that is they would, not put someone on overtime for training or things like that. And so I just,
To accommodate.
Yeah.
to accommodate these kinds of things. I mean, we are constantly looking at the budgets to make sure that we're within those resources. And so we do reallocate to try and get at those things that we maybe wouldn't have been able to do otherwise. So, and I know
Remember-
Mr. Taylor wanted to say something as well.
And remember, we always get every quarter, staff brings the budget to be amended because
Yeah.
of all of these
Things are
fluid
fluid,
things.
yes,
Yeah,
you said.
Bill.
Hopefully that'll take some edge off the board. And secondly, if it's going the right direction, hopefully we can do a little more than for our 50th in that regard as well. So hopefully it'll be a win-win.
And that'd be,
So what-
I mean, ideally, it would be great because it is a 50th that
Right, I'm just-
we do, whatever the contribution becomes, we can even dedicate it to something. I mean, in the case of, Apple Pie with their fireworks, they just,
So what are we?
I'm sorry, was there an air leak somewhere?
Yeah, well, I'm just
That
trying
threw me
to.
off. I'm like, where's it coming?
Yeah, no, I was just trying to
Get the number.
get to the point that because there are two things. One, we have to make sure that we do something with the policy that we have.
Which does not have to be addressed right away. That we have time to work with that.
No, but we have to make sure that somehow we're making a shift.
Staff needs direction.
Yeah, and staff needs direction if we're going to say we're going to take that, what was
This year,
that staff,
we're-
the 50%.
right now, this year, we're,
4,000.
yeah, for this year.
Right. As Heather and Steve pointed out,
And then we'll,
since it didn't exist in 2013, it wasn't planned for this
Right.
year. So the dollar. So then it becomes more of a conversation of what dollar amount are we comfortable with.
Yeah, what is that?
Giving the fire muster and then obviously we are eliminating art and all that jazz from our event festival list, period. And we can talk about the policy on the tier level and other ideas that can be brought to the table.
Yeah, because there are other people who have been waiting in the wings. If this doesn't happen, they were thinking of another event, a legacy event. But,
Country Western?
yeah.
Did I hear?
It's been talked about, but they've been waiting.
Well,
Yeah,
it's too late
Suzanne.
for this year anyway.
Yeah, it is. So,
Just clarify this. Okay, 2013, we didn't have that money, so where's the money coming from?
it's
General
overtime.
fund.
All of it is overtime.
We've had the same amount of overtime dollars in Public Works streets for 5 years. Let's just say that. And so in some of those years, but that dollar amount, some years it's come in a little under, some years it's been over because of the weather. The biggest driver for our
Well,
overtime budget
that's
is
my
weather.
question.
It has
This
nothing to
year-
do with the festivals. And so, but we've absorbed, that's part of our overtime calculation is we know we allocate X amount to festivals every year. But it is, you're never going to see it hit exactly on the 51,000. Let's say it's $51,000. I think the easiest thing for us to do would be to reduce the reimbursement amount that they reimbursed us with their check. That's
Yeah.
the simplest. We would
That's
carry out our tasks exactly as we
Yeah,
planned.
that's,
we just
that's
would
where-
ask them to reimburse us a lesser amount, and
Yeah,
we would make
that
the
goes to their
adjustment
bottom
as a
line.
staff on our overtime because we don't know what the summer holds. I mean,
Yeah.
for Public Works, we're now somewhat stable until next winter. Police and Fire, obviously, theirs is up in the air still. So.
Sure.
Yeah, and so what it is, Council, is that there are two things. One is we direct staff on the amount of the support.
I would recommend that we reduce the reimbursement by $8,000.
That's a full,
no, I was at 4,000.
yeah,
I know. I'm just recommending $8,000.
okay.
I know that there's a corresponding fireworks display edition for our 50th anniversary that has something to do with that number.
But maybe there can be some people who can support it by sponsorship. Yeah.
Yes, well, and that's to my point, too, because FOBPAC no longer exists. So you've got a vacuum there, and also Art and All That Jazz no longer exists. So you'd have a vacuum there in terms of getting
Contributions.
sponsors in contributions. But I do, I agree that there should be some response from us.
Yeah.
If I may, just make one point on it, that my preference would be a credit of sorts towards it.
That's what he's saying.
And one of the things I keep in mind here is that because we're moving the parade, the community parade to Saturday, I think the estimate was that it was going to reduce the overall expense by $4,000. I'm not sure if that's just our portion of it, or is that the total? But because of that, because we're eliminating the one day, that's going to be savings to both the city and to us, obviously, with that. So,
Well, I think, yeah. But the thing is, that those are your bookkeeping and your estimated. What we're dealing with tonight is that you're recommending 8, a reduction of 8.
Yes, and I'll further support that recommendation by the fact that the consolidation of the parades eliminates all of the police and public safety for Sunday for that parade. It's now consolidated in one. That's what Tom's point was. He's just reduced the financial burden for both the city and the fire muster by consolidating the Sunday parade on Saturday.
But that'll go to his bottom line.
Both.
in part now, to go to part, both because it was a cost sharing.
Yeah. So.
We save, they save. And also raise the price of the beer.
It'd be great if if beer would go up and admission would be free because the surrounding communities don't charge.
No, I mean that.
I think that's why they get more beer.
Because I worked at Beer Tent.
So wait a minute. So Mary, are you seconding? Dan's.
Well, I don't know what I
Because
want
we
to
need to
do.
direct staff.
Oh,
You're
8,000, that's a little rich for me. I could go 5.
It's our 50th anniversary. I think we need to do
I
some special
support
things
5.
here.
okay.
I support 5.
Yeah, Heather?
Madam Mayor, members of the council, what I'm hearing is a consensus about additional support. Maybe the dollar amount is in question. The question I have for you is this a cap on the support, as Councilmember Keeley said earlier? Is this still a percentage? Do you want to go down to a 40% reimbursement? Or
That's a further discussion. That's only for now, because he put on the table a two-tier system, and we're not even looking at that. Are we having a two-tier system for all of our legacy events? I don't think I'm ready to make that decision
Not
tonight.
tonight. No, that's
But-
the further
Yeah,
discussion
I
with
think
staff to come.
this
to
is
discuss
just to fund
from a
this
policy.
year.
Yep.
No, I understand that, but so we're just talking about this is kind of a one-time blip, keep
That's
the
right.
policy the same.
Yes.
Are we eliminating all that jazz as a legacy event?
That we can do.
What we have understood from tonight, and once staff confirm with Dan Gustafson that that is no longer an event, then it becomes eliminated, because I think our policy is once they're out, they're out.
So here's what I'm understanding the discussion to be, just to be crystal clear, because I've heard several different
Yes.
proposals.
I'm trying to
Is that
Me too.
what I'm hearing is that we would continue to, what we would do is we would perform the fire muster at the level that, which we understand will be slightly less than this 27,000, so say maybe 25,000, and then we would calculate the 50% reimbursement from that, and then subtract 5,000 from that,
Yes.
Yes.
from what that required reimbursement was, just for this year, for the 50th anniversary
Yes.
celebration.
Yes. Okay.
Thank you.
Now,
Wanted to make sure I was clear.
I don't hear a second to your 8, your recommendation. So, but I heard a 5 and a second to, and Suzanne, you support the 5?
Yeah.
Okay. So, what I hear then is, yes.
Would in light of the consolidation of the parade, would you consider only for this year 6,000 and give them the 2,000 that they just saved us?
No, okay.
Good, Dan.
Yeah.
I'm serious. If you were good with 4 and they just consolidated the parade and gave us back 2, let's
Yeah.
give it to them this year.
Yeah.
This year, because it's the 50th anniversary.
No.
No. Yeah, well, I hear too.
Get in beer, have them raise
Yeah.
beer by a buck.
Okay.
The other thing, though, could we, Madam Mayor, could we invite Mr. Taylor to give a pitch to the people who are watching?
You can come and
to
pitch.
contribute, to volunteer, to do whatever you need, Tom.
We'll do that, and I appreciate that very much.
Yeah,
Any
you can
news
come
that we can
to
get out
our
would be
council
great. We'll do
meeting, and
that.
during citizens' comment, talk about
Yeah.
FogPack did that. Come and
Yeah.
talk about what's going on, what their mission is, and they need volunteers, they need sponsors, and all of that, and then have them call you and go to your site.
We'll do that. Thank you very much. I
Yeah.
appreciate it. Thank
So what I'm hearing today, then,
I think we have our direction, thank you.
yes. Okay, and it's only
don't need a form.
a reduction
I thought you
of
did
5.
vote. I'm sorry, you're right,
Yeah,
yeah.
no.
I think you just give us a
I'll
vote.
table it.
We don't.
We
you
got
don't. You give us
consensus, and so we have direction to staff to move forward, and it's only for 1 year, and then we will take a look at what that tier system is. So
We'll welcome
Staff-
Mr. Taylor back at a formal meeting. where he
but
can-
when we start to look at the tier system, and
No,
staff
I
will.
mean, when
for the-
for
Pull
a
up the
pitch.
meeting.
Oh, yes. I mean,
The
you
market.
come, you might want to come at the next council meeting, or, yeah.
We'll get with our team and
Tell
we'll
how
do
much
that.
fun it is
Yeah.
to volunteer.
Yeah,
Really.
or you want to come the first meeting of May, which would,
We'll do that.
yeah, come to
Okay.
the first meeting in May.
I'll get it on our calendar.
Yeah,
I appreciate
that would be
it.
a better meeting for you to come to.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks
Thank
for
you for
everything
being
you
here.
do. Thank you.
Okay, and I don't think we have anything else on roundtable but we'll go to the reports, and I think after we've made the decision, you are going to have something to say about our interviews, right? Because now that we made the decision about the HOC.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Bill, nothing? Mary?
Just a small thing on 35 Solutions. This last month, we had a presentation by Steve Elkins from the Met Council. And he talked about the Transportation Policy Plan solicitations, also known as a TPP. This fits with the Met Council and their long-range plan for transportation. A couple of things that I thought were interesting. One is that through the census, they are now expanding the transportation vision of the Met area to include Wright and Sherburne counties because of commuters, which I thought was very interesting. He also said that they want to align it with Thrive 2040, and he mentioned housing. And after my unsolicited comment, he refused to make eye contact with me for the rest of the meeting. Anyway, but this will guide the comp plans, he said. And Liz Workman was there too. I thought she was going to die. So anyway, there will be, he says they want to reflect the market, not fight the market, and move forward with a performance-based plan. Sounds good to me. And this plan will be available for public comment August 4th through September 18th. That's all I have.
Okay, Suzanne?
No, nothing.
Dan?
Well, I have some fire muster discussion if you're.
I think we did that. Okay.
I'm not good, thank you.
Okay. We had our Municipal Legislative Commission meeting. We meet on a quarterly basis, and I think the most interesting part of that meeting is that we had Representative Lencheski speak to us, and after she spoke, she asked for comments and all of that, so I asked her how she felt about more tools for all cities, and then gave the such as administrative citation. She said she liked it. Now, we had heard from our LMC that who's carrying the bill for us, that Senator Skoye was not going to put that into the omnibus bill. And they said it was because Representative Lencheski, who is the chair of the tax committee on the House side, didn't like it. Well, we found out that she does like it. But now I don't know. It's still
in conversation.
It's still in conversation. So we're rallying our legislators to see if they can do that. So during that was the most important thing, I think, for us that came out of that. And of course, then there were some updates on the legislative agenda and some conversations with regard to our breakfast meetings and how it went and what we need to do different. Is there anything that was of importance? I think the most important thing was Ann Lencheski. Yes. And then International Festival. We're moving ahead with a lot of the planning. Everything's going well. And with raising funds. So we're on a good track with all of that. The Burnsville Convention and Visitors Bureau, our last meeting, we approved inviting a new member to the board who we had sent out invitations to people because we had an opening, and the person that we reviewed who submitted a letter of intent, we had made phone calls, but the one person who submitted a letter of intent and a resume really, I think, from the whole board, really saw that she would add great value. And she is Sarah Ritson, and she is the marketing director at UTC. And so the board did approve her being a board member, and Amy and I then did the orientation for her, and she's going to be at our first board meeting. And then the other important thing that happened at the meeting was that we adopted the employee handbook, which was something that needed to be done. And so now all of the documents, the governing documents for the Convention and Visitors Bureau are all updated, cleaned up, from the Articles of Incorporation to the bylaws to the agreement with the city that we had approved the amendment of just some language, and now the employee handbook. I think those are the important things. The organization is doing well. The average daily rate of our hotels continue to go up, and their occupancy rates continue to go up. So it's a good thing that's going on. Anything that I missed from any of that?
Nope, you did a very nice summation.
Trying to summon, yeah. And then, but that's what's going on. The International Festival is doing well. So, good.
When you're finished, I have some garage news.
Oh.
Pass along.
Good.
City
Okay,
Manager
I'm done.
Heather reminded me I got the minutes in my email, and I had forgotten. I got them.
Yeah.
So I can go over that.
Yeah,
with you
I
when
was
you're finished.
I was to attend the Regional Council of Mayors, but I had some backup with some stuff from Washington, and I think Heather's going to talk with all of you about that, so I didn't make it to the Regional Council of Mayors on Monday. But on a one-on-one, she will talk, because when I was in Washington meeting on my role as an advisor to the administrator, some good things. So she'll talk with all of you one-on-one on all of that. So,
Great.
yeah.
Are you going to the MLC? No, Metro Cities annual meeting? Is anybody going?
I think there were conflicts on mine.
Do we have anybody going? Bueller, is anybody attending?
I don't know. Heather, Jenny,
I didn't. I had a conflict on my calendar.
yeah. On those two, LMC, I always have to, because we have MLC and LMC. So LMC's legislative, I think I have a conflict there, and I had a conflict on Metro. I don't know
Metro
about.
Cities is this Thursday night, or is it next Thursday night?
I think it's next Thursday.
Next Thursday night, yeah. Okay, I'm just curious if anyone's
Okay.
going.
Go ahead. You have a garage?
I do. I have garage minutes from last night's meeting.
Okay.
They had 3 members present and 2 not. This was very interesting, and I wish I would have been there in person, but it would have been a very interesting meeting. Terry Schultz, Director of Natural Resources, attended the garage, and he apparently went up first and gave an update. This would have been an update that would have solidified maybe some rumors or, some loose chatter over a period of time, but maybe brought some more official nature to it, I suppose. But he noted that the garage's after-school program will be moving into Nicollet Junior Higher at the beginning of the 2014-2015 school year. This will allow after-school program participants to stay after school and get homework help from their teachers, participate in programming, and then be able to take an activity bus home. In the future, they would like to expand to other ISD 191 junior high schools and hopefully be able to provide a site at the YMCA as well. And then the second point he made was the City of Burnsville is committed to keeping the music venue portion of the garage open through the end of 2014. Beyond that, they are still unsure as to what the music venue will look like or where it will even be located. A lot will depend on the facility study that is being done. But they would like to keep the venue in Burnsville. There has been talk of doing shows at the Black Box at the Performing Arts Center, AIM Center, the Miraz Center at the high school, and possibly being located at the Burnsville High School senior campus. So I thought that probably was, I would like to have been there to hear him present that. They talked about a prom lock-in. They decided not to do a prom this year. They're going to do a lock-in in June, fun event for the kids. And then this was very interesting, the weekend update. So referencing the music venue, which I just spoke about, or he just covered, the attendance numbers have doubled and nearly tripled where they were this time last year. Their YouTube page has 200 subscribers and over 30,000 views. In addition, the blog page has over 60,000 views. And Jack is working hard and is already booking dates in October. I have to say,
60,000 views on a blog is really phenomenal.
yes, that the music portion has always been a
the
raving
driver.
success.
Been the driver.
Jack has taken it to new levels I don't know that they've ever seen over there. He is nothing short of spectacular with that program.
Yeah.
And he's done some wonderful things. Not to say that the other staff has not done well with the after-school program, because those numbers have been increasing.
Yeah.
This music part of it has
The
been
music has been the
kicking
thing
butt.
and the music part has always been unique
Yes.
from the very beginning.
And it gets thousands of kids that don't go to the after-school program
Yeah.
come because of the music. I mean, it's really an entity amongst itself.
Yeah.
It's very, very uniquely
Yeah.
separate from the rest of the garage programming. But anyway, I thought that was a very interesting update.
Yeah.
And I'm glad that that is, that was delivered by Terry, who's a great guy, and he can deliver, news as well as anybody.
Okay.
So I hope that the folks over there and everybody understand that this is in the best interest of the kids. And
Good. All right, Michelle, get your calendars out, or else she's going to give us some.
Yes, I actually have been scouring the calendars that I have and looking at those dates when I know some of you are going to be out of town for business or vacations and that type of thing. And the two dates that I came up with that were
For interviews.
for these, yes, this is for interviews for commission applicants, and I'm hoping that we will only need one evening of interviews, and of course that does depend on how many applications we receive. At this point, it does not look like we will need more than one evening. Of course, we're only about halfway through the month, so we still have 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks left to receive applications.
What we need to do is to also have a discussion. We have 5 members from the HOC that we said tonight that we would move to other commissions, which means that we have already committed to move them to fill roles, which
how
says.
many openings do we have in the
And that's what I'm going to say. How many openings, so that we might have to say we only have so many to interview for open, and how many openings?
I don't have the exact number. I could almost add it up in my head if I thought about it, but I wouldn't want to mislead anybody. There are, I know, at least 3 sitting commissioners that do not plan to reapply. We do
Planning
have
commissioners?
no. It's across different commissions.
We should just get the dates
Yeah.
and then we'll
Yes.
do the rest.
Yeah, and then we can.
We can do a
So,
memo for you
what I'm
all.
thinking is
okay.
that
9:06.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I'm going to need a break really soon.
we would need to maybe request an application from those HOC, DRC members, requesting them to apply for maybe a different commission they may be interested in.
Okay.
Madam Mayor Michelle, we do have some indication as to which ones they're interested in already.
Yeah, we
With their
already do.
comments, yes.
Reapply. Let's
Yeah.
go with the
So-
2 dates, and then we'll do a memo to them with
Yeah.
the recommendations.
That's-
It is.
yeah.
The 2
because-
dates that I'm suggesting are Wednesday, May 14th, or Thursday, May 15th.
That's good.
I've already looked at your calendar, Madam Mayor, and City Manager Johnston. I know that does not conflict with your vacation. I did.
No,
take
it
that into-
doesn't. 14th is wide open, 15th is okay.
Yeah.
I cannot do the 14th.
You can do 15?
I can do the 15th.
Okay. Dan?
Are we talking evening, 6:30?
Yeah. No,
We
no.
would be talking probably,
Like 4?
we usually
And
start
then go early?
around
Oh,
4 or 5 in the
4:30?
afternoon.
5?
What would be the earliest? It depends on how many applications we get.
Uh-huh.
And I have a 2 to 3 that day.
5:30.
So any-
So on the 15th, we're talking?
15th at 5:30.
5:30 would be my earliest
5:30 would be the earliest.
Okay.
day.
15th, and you'll put it on
15?
the calendar?
Yeah.
So I will
How many
prepare
do
to
we
work with.
plan on having? How many do you?
Well, we don't
Of course,
know
we
just
don't
yet.
know how many applications we're going to get.
If we have a short list, can we tuck it in front of a council meeting like on the 13th and come in at like 3 or 4 or whatever? And
How about if we just see what happens and then maybe
Yeah,
we
because
talk
I
about
think Suzanne with her work, and she's down in Minneapolis.
Well, a Tuesday, I couldn't get here until, I could get here at 6. On a Tuesday.
Yeah.
15th
Yeah.
is the
The 15th at
Preferred.
5:30 is what we're looking
Yeah.
at right now.
Okay.
All right, and then I'll report back once I know better what the number's going to be.
Yeah. Okay, good. And then make sure okay. Heather, anything else?
No, ma'am.
Okay. Steve and Jenny, anything else? With that, we stand adjourned. Thank you.
You even want an update on anything?
How about say some poem?
Yeah, you're kind of all for killing time, aren't you?
Yeah.